Chapter 476, Part 1. Facing the Chitauri army this time, Chen Luo mobilized most of his forces. Needless to say, Tony Thor and others, King Kong, the Autobots who made their first appearance, and those who gradually fell silent after the Apocalypse battle, Mutant, and finally the Blood Clan troops led by Serena and the others. In addition to the Magneto forces like Logan and the Garden of Eden, all the powerful people on the surface of the Earth are now gathered here, and they have devoted themselves to this unprecedented war. If we include Steve and Natasha Romanoff, who are the latest to join, as well as Bobby Colossus and others who are still in school and can only serve as reserves due to age issues. All the strong people participating in this war are already Chen Luo and a member of the Avengers created by Tony. But due to various reasons, these members have their own things to do on weekdays, so they have not met in person. Now that they have finally gotten together, they will definitely organize 10 meetings and group tours. Seeing that everyone agreed to come down, Chen Luo nodded without hesitation. The next moment, his body disappeared in an instant. A few seconds later, when he appeared again, in his hand, Thor also appeared in front of the 17 people. After looking around and realizing that nothing was missing, Chen Luo smiled and said, "Well, now that everyone is gathered, let's set off. Everyone gather in a circle first, and I will teleport everyone away." Just as Chen Luo began to command everyone to stand still, planning to use the teleportation ability to take everyone to the Skull Island headquarters, the next moment, Johnny's voice sounded. "Wait a moment. Chun, did you forget someone?" Pointing to one side, Johnny said helplessly, "The big green guy hasn't been found yet. Are you sure you want to leave like this?" "Hulk!" Chen Luo was stunned for a moment, glanced around, and suddenly realized, "I didn't even notice it if you didn't tell me. Where is he now?" As soon as the words fell, the next moment, the whole place fell into silence. Seeing everyone's reaction, Chen Luo frowned slightly and asked, "What's wrong with him?" Everyone looked at each other, and their originally relaxed hearts slowly became heavy. Finally, Johnny sighed and told Chen Luo what happened to Hulk. After you entered the portal, Hulk fought with one of the demigods, and was eventually swallowed by his lava. Now we don't know where he is. After listening to his story, Chen Luo said nothing and looked at the place where Hulk disappeared. With a thought, he disappeared instantly. The next moment, when Chen Luo arrived at his destination, he saw that the land that used to be lined with high-rise buildings had completely changed. All buildings were swallowed up by the magma released by Tully. Even the original asphalt roads were melted by the magma. Dozens of miles of the ground were eroded by the high temperature of the magma. The land collapsed by about half a meter, but then it was covered by more thick magma. As the magma gradually cooled down, the originally red fluid quickly began to solidify, covering an area of dozens of miles around, forming a hill of about tens of meters in height. The hill was completely pitch black, but there was still some red fluid that had not completely cooled and solidified. Colorful liquid flows and thick white smoke rises, which looks spectacular. According to Johnny, Hulk is now buried in this hill after being successfully attacked by Tully. Slowly falling to the edge of the hill, Chen Luo said nothing. His powerful divine power surged out and turned into a mountain-cutting blade, slashing hard towards the hill in front of him. Boom! Constantly, sounds were heard one after another. After Tully died, he lost the blessing of the other party's divine power. The hill in front of him was unable to stop Chen Luo in the slightest. Under Chen Luo's violent demolition, it began to shrink at a speed visible to the naked eye. The scene inside was gradually revealed. Finally, after nearly a minute or so, Chen Luo cut off nearly half of the hill in front of him, and finally found an abnormality in the center of the hill. With the characteristics of his divine power, Chen Luo could clearly feel that there was a powerful breath of life coming from underneath the hill. What surprised him even more was that beneath this breath of life, there were two faint breaths of life emerging from his perception. But what was a bit ominous was that these two breaths of life were becoming dim at a speed visible to the naked eye. Coming down, it seems like it will dissipate at any moment. Upon realizing this, Chen Luo's eyes narrowed, and his divine power turned into a sharp sword, instantly splitting the hill in front of him in half. Then, the remaining power continued unabated, and it sank into the ground. Under Chen Luo's control, it turned into a sword again. A bloody palm grabbed the land in front of him from the ground and completely exposed it to the air. Earth and rocks scattered one after another. And finally, the three figures that were originally buried underground gradually appeared in front of Chen Luo. A huge figure about 2 meters tall with dark green skin was half kneeling on the ground at the moment, supporting the ground with both hands, providing enough space for the two much smaller figures below, and firmly protecting them. Inside, that figure of huge amounts was undoubtedly Hulk. After seeing the other party's movements, Chen Luo realized it in his heart. After hearing Johnny's narration just now, Chen Luo already had doubts in his heart. Although with Hulk's strength, it seems that he is no match for the demigod, but that is because the anger in the opponent's body has not reached its peak. After the previous battle with Hulk, Chen Luo already understood that once Hulk's anger reached its peak, he would be able to compete with even a powerful demigod. Therefore, Chen Luo has never been worried about Hulk's death in Tu Lai's hands. And the reality was exactly as he expected. 957 The reason why Hulk has not emerged from the magma for a long time is also very simple. Just after he was buried by the magma, by chance, under him, as a certain high-rise building was buried by the magma, his body was buried underground. A basement was finally revealed. Under the high-temperature erosion of the magma, the upper rock wall of the basement was quickly melted. Only then did Hulk finally discover that there were 2 humans still alive in this basement. Therefore, in order to protect them from the magma, Hulk could only move the 2 humans first. People protect themselves and use their bodies to support them to create a space. Although the magma above Hulk gradually cooled down, there was still a large amount of magma flowing in the middle layer. So if they went out at this time, the 2 of them would still be at risk of being hurt. It was precisely because of this that Hulk never chose to leave and worked hard to support they hold their bodies, waiting for someone to find their traces and rescue them. It wasn't until Chen Luo appeared, and then after he took action, that the 3 Hulks were finally successfully rescued. As for the 2 people under Hulk's protection, the reason why their life breath became weak was because the oxygen in the space gradually decreased. Now that they have seen the light of day again and received sufficient oxygen, the 2 people have gradually recovered. Come over. Hulk, I'm coming. As Chen Luo's voice sounded, Hulk's body trembled, and then, as if he finally relaxed, he closed his eyes and fell to the ground in a coma. Chapter 477, Part 1. As Hulk fell into coma, his body was also returning to its original state at a speed visible to the naked eye. Finally, a figure wearing only a pair of damaged shorts was seen, fainting aside, leaving only the 2 figures originally protected by Hulk. He stood there helplessly. Seeing this scene, Chen Luo sighed helplessly, came to the other party, waved his hand casually, and his divine power surged out, wrapping the banner and floating it in the air. After doing all this, Chen Luo finally turned his head and looked at the 2 people on the side. The 2 people were a man and a woman. They looked about 20 years old. Their faces looked somewhat similar, as if they were related by blood. The most eye-catching thing is the special clothes they wear. They are white with blue stripes interlaced in them. They look somewhat similar to the clothes worn by prisoners. Seeing the 2 people who were a little uneasy, Chen Luo paused and asked, "Children, tell me, why are you here?" Maybe it's because of Chen Luo's face, and because they were all rescued by Chen Luo just now, they both have a certain amount of trust in him. There was a moment of silence, and then the young girl among them finally spoke. "First, sir, my name is Wanda, and that's my brother, Pietro Bayum." Hearing the names of the 2 people, Chen Luo was stunned, and there was a slight light in his eyes. He also didn't expect that things would be such a coincidence, that he would meet these 2 brothers and sisters here, and in such an environment. If Hulk hadn't discovered the 2 of them in time and protected them, I'm afraid the 2 people who could have become powerful mutants in the future would have disappeared from this world early under Tully's attack. Wanda Maximov, a strong person who can control origin magic power, is an undisputed 5th-level mutant. Even after Chen's ability is completely awakened and she masters the Phoenix Force, she may not be weaker than the opponent with her power. Pietro Maximov, awakening the super-speeding mutant, although there is a qualitative gap in ability with his sister, he also has huge amounts of growth potential. With a little guidance, there may not be no chance of becoming extraordinary or even stronger. Looking at the special costumes worn by the 2 people, combined with the plot he knew before, Chen Luo also had a vague guess in his mind. When these 2 people first appeared, some time had passed since the arrival of the Chitauri army. As Thor left with Loki, but correspondingly, as Loki's weapon, the Psychic Interceptor, also stayed on the Earth. He has been lurking in the hands of SHIELD's Hydra. After a period of research, relying on the Mind Gem's ability, one of the top executives of HYDRA, Baron Zemo, took advantage of Wanda's brother and sister's hatred for Tony and took the initiative to let him conduct experiments. After experiencing all kinds of pain, the 2 finally succeeded in awakening the mutant ability in their bodies. So reasoning based on this timeline, the reason why the 2 of them are dressed like this now may have something to do with HYDRA. Wanting to understand this, Chen Luo's eyes flashed, and he suddenly had an idea. With the potential of these 2 siblings, even without the catalyst of the Mind Gem, there will be a chance to awaken their own abilities in the future. Moreover, with Loki's defeat and the Mind Gem falling into his hands, how could Baron Zemo get it? So without the Mind Gem, if Wanda still participate in Hydra's experiment, whether they can awakening ability is unknown, and judging from the cruelty of the Hydra experiment, they may even die directly during the experiment. Rather than doing this, it would be better to let them join their side in advance to ensure the safety of the 2 of them. Chen Luo had another reason for making such a decision. Although it is not mentioned in the movie, according to the plot of the comics, The two brothers and sisters are likely to have a blood relationship with Eric. Thinking that he and Eric are old friends, since he knows that they will be in danger, there is no reason why he should not help. But even if he had made a decision in his heart, there was still one thing that he cared about. If his memory was correct, the reason why the two brothers and sisters took the initiative to participate in the experiment was for the sake of trust, caused by revenge. If this problem is not handled properly, Tony will be in trouble when they succeed in awakening. Suddenly, Chen Luo came back to his senses and looked at the two brothers and sisters who were a little worried, with a faint smile on his face. It seems like you have nowhere to go now, right? If you believe me, then come with me. Hearing this, the two of them were stunned at first, and then Wanda looked behind Chen Luo. The bloody light holding the banner, her bright eyes glowed a little. After hesitating for a moment, she said nervously, "Sir, if you can give us great power, then we are willing to leave with you." Duh? Chen Luo raised his eyebrows and asked, "You want power? Can you tell me why?" The two looked at each other, and finally Wanda's tone was a little low, and she slowly spoke out her reasons. Just like what Chen Luo thought before, the reason why they want to get power is really to take revenge on Tony. When their hometown was bombed by a missile, Wanda accidentally discovered that the weapons used by the other party were manufactured by the Stark Group, and their mother was also killed in the missile bombing, which led to the two's subsequent wandering. It is precisely because of this that the two of them engraved the name Stark deeply in their hearts. In order to avenge their mother and their former home, they took part in the Hydra experiment with a desire for powerful power. But as luck would have it, on the second day after they participated, they didn't even have time to be sent to the base for experiments. As the portal opened and the Chitauri army descended, they were also completely trapped. On the spot, those who brought them here were only focused on escaping and had long forgotten about them. If it weren't for the magma erosion in Tully, and Hulk happened to appear nearby, I'm afraid the two of them would have been melted by the magma, and there would be no chance to talk to Chen Luo now. After listening to the two people's narratives, Chen Luo paused and then said, "If you want strength, I can indeed help you achieve this." Hearing this, Wanda and Wanda's faces suddenly flashed with surprise, but before they could speak, Chen Luo's voice sounded again. "But if you want to seek revenge from Tony, I'm afraid I can't agree to this. If you want to come to my place, the first thing I ask of you is to put down your hatred for Tony. How about it? Can you do it?" Upon hearing this, the two people's expressions froze, and they immediately stood there. Chapter 478, Part 1. There was silence for a moment, and finally, beside Wanda, Pietro was the first to be unable to hold back, and without hiding the anger on his face, he spoke loudly. "This is impossible. Our home was destroyed because of the Stark Group, and our mother. If it wasn't for that war, how could she die? So no matter what, we have to seek revenge from Tony Stark. If it's not for this goal, even if we get power, what's the use?" After saying this, Pietro pulled Wanda's arm beside him, intending to pull her away with him. Even with Chen Luo's promise, they can get the power they dream of here. But if they can't use this power for revenge, he would rather go to Hydra again. At least when it comes to revenge, the other party will not restrict them. However, just when Pietro was about to leave with Wanda, something beyond his expectation was that Wanda did not choose to leave with him, but stood still, lowered her head, her beautiful brows slightly furrowed, as if she was thinking. "What are you wearing?" After a moment, Wanda finally raised her head slowly, looked directly into Chen Luo's eyes, and asked with seriousness on her face, "Can I ask, sir, why you don't allow us to take revenge?" "I want a reason. It's very simple." Chen Luo nodded, without any hidden 873 thoughts, and said calmly, "Because Tony is my friend." As soon as these words came out, the eyes of the two people looking at Chen Luo changed instantly. Puzzle, anger, even disappointment. All kinds of emotions were flowing in Wanda's eyes. In her heart, Chen Luo's image completely collapsed at this moment. It turned out that after seeing Chen Luo's action of rescuing them, she felt full of gratitude and good impression towards Chen Luo. However, all this changed instantly after learning about the relationship between Chen Luo and Tony. Recalling their previous encounters, Wanda's heart was instantly filled with anger, and her bright eyes suddenly became sharp. She pulled Pietro aside, whose eyes were red and wanted to rush to question, and looked at Chen Luo, gritting her teeth. "Road? Why? Since you know that we want to seek revenge on Tony Stark, why are you still willing to accept us?" Hearing this question, Chen Luo immediately understood that there was still a trace of reason in the other party's heart at this moment, and he was not completely overwhelmed by anger. Seeing Wanda's reaction, Chen Luo became more appreciative of her. "Before I answer you, I want to ask you a question first. When did the war in your hometown happen?" Hearing Chen Luo's question, doubts flashed through Wanda's mind, but she still answered, 3 months ago." Hearing this, Chen Luo finally had a smile on his face and felt relieved. "If it is this time period, I think you must have found the wrong target for revenge. I can assure you that Tony has nothing to do with the war in your hometown. You're talking nonsense." Pietro on the side didn't believe his explanation. The moment Chen Luo finished speaking, he couldn't wait to retort. We have seen it with our own eyes. Those missiles that landed near our home, those missiles that landed near our house, but it's just marked by the Stark Group. Don't you want to say that those weapons didn't come from the Stark Group? Regarding Pietro's question, Chen Luo did not answer directly. He still looked at Wanda and continued to ask. Second question, I think you should know that Stark Group is only a company responsible for manufacturing weapons. As for the war in your hometown, do you think the main responsibility lies with those who started the war, or is it the original weapons manufacturing company? What's the difference? Pietro snorted coldly, looking at Chen Luo with evil eyes. Whether it's the Stark Group or those mercenaries, they are the murderers who destroyed our hometown. When we get the power, we will use these people in the future. I won't let anyone go. Facing Pietro's answer, Chen Luo smiled. Boy, if you think like this, then I'm afraid there will be too many people who have enmity with you. The Stark Group has hundreds of thousands of employees around the world. When the weapons were sold, the weapons were designed, produced, promoted, and sold. That was the scale of an entire industrial chain. If the weapons that attacked your hometown are manufactured by the Stark Group, then there are at least tens of thousands of people involved in these weapons. So according to your opinion, after you get the power, do you still want to kill all these people? After hearing Chen Luo's words, the two people's expressions froze, and they were stunned on the spot. This is a question they have never thought about. If they follow Pietro's thinking, both the people who attacked their hometown and all the people involved in the manufacture and sale of these weapons are within the scope of their revenge. If they really go all the way, if they continue to pursue it, the number of revenge targets they are looking for may be astronomical. Thinking that tens of thousands of people might be killed in the future, the two of them hesitated for a moment. But this is not surprising. After all, they're just young people who have just grown up, perhaps driven and stimulated by hatred. Their thoughts will be a little extreme, but if they are really allowed to kill tens of thousands of people, they still can't make up their minds. Determination. Pietro's face turned green and red, and his aura instantly weakened. He thought for a while, but still refused to be outdone, and said, even if we don't seek revenge on everyone, we will definitely not let go of Tony Stark, the culprit. I told you, Tony has nothing to do with this. You think we will believe you if you say it? Who doesn't know about your relationship with Tony Stark? Looking at the arrogant and stubborn young man in front of him, Chen Luo shook his head and ignored him. He turned to Wanda, who had been silent, and explained, the reason why I say this is definitely my reason. Actually, it's very simple. A few months ago, Tony had decided to close down the entire martial arts department after returning from the kidnapping. However, there were some surprises here. Later, Chen Luo roughly told the two of them Tony's original situation. So, the weapons of the Stark Group at that time were sold by the man named Obadiah, and Tony did not know about the sale of these weapons. After all, that guy Tony had already decided not to be an arms dealer at that time. So if you want to seek revenge from Tony, you are probably looking for the wrong person. If you really want to find a culprit, it should be Obadiah. After listening to Chen Luo's explanation, the two of them fell into silence for a while, looking at each other with a trace of confusion in their eyes. Why should we believe your explanation? What if you lied? After thinking about it, Pietro still looked at Chen Luo with some suspicion. Obviously, he didn't believe much in Chen Luo's explanation just now. But contrary to him, after listening to Chen Luo's explanation, the anger on Wanda's face calmed down quietly at some point. In response to Pietro's question, Chen Luo smiled and said directly, so I can give you a chance now, a chance to verify it with Tony in person. Upon hearing this, the two people's eyes suddenly lit up. Chapter 479, Part 1. In the end, brother and sister Chen Luo and Wanda reached an agreement. After promising to confront Tony in a few days, the future famous Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver also agreed to temporarily join the Chen Luo camp until they were sure that Chen Luo had not deceived them about Tony. There is a possibility of leaving. After using teleportation to bring the two of them to bases in other areas of New York, Chen Luo withdrew and returned to the original place. The reason why they did not choose to meet Tony now was that after this battle, Tony and the others were very tired. And secondly, even if they were allowed to meet now, their explanations would still not be convincing. So Chen Luo has made up his mind. On the one hand, he must give Wanda brother and sister some time to think. On the other hand, Tony can also collect some evidence that Obadiah sold weapons. After having the factual evidence, their statement will be more credible. In addition, even if Chen Luo is sure to convince the two of them to give up revenge on Tony, if they are not given a channel to vent, this incident will be a permanent shadow in their hearts, and it will also be a big hidden danger for the two of them. Especially Wanda, who will be awakening origin magic power in the future. If she becomes emotionally unstable and activates her ability unconsciously, what impact will it have on the world? Even Chen Luo has no way of knowing. As more powerful opponents arrive in the future, Wanda's ability will not remain hidden forever. and sooner or later others will learn about it. Once someone wants to take advantage of this to influence Wanda, this matter will most likely become her flaw. Therefore, whether it is for Wanda or the world, Chen Luo must eliminate this hidden danger and minimize the possibility of the other party going berserk. As for how to eliminate hidden dangers and release the negative emotions accumulated in Wanda's heart, Chen Luo has already had an idea in mind. Shaking his head, he cleared the thoughts from his mind. It has been some time since Chen Luo came here. Now that Banner has been successfully found, it is time to go back. As for Wanda's affairs, I will find them alone when I have the opportunity in the future. Tony can just discuss it. Then, with a thought, Chen Luo took Banner with him and disappeared instantly. After seeing that Banner was still alive, everyone's tense nerves finally relaxed. By coincidence, at the same time that Chen Luo was arranging Wanda and the two of them, Tony's side, after a long journey, Logan finally arrived late. Joined the crowd. After everyone arrived, Chen Luo kept moving and immediately left with Tony and others. Seeing the disappearance of Chen Luo and his group, Fury's eyes flickered slightly as he stayed on the spot. He shook his head and did not stay here any longer. He turned and walked away. Although the Chitauri army has been eliminated by Chen Luo and the others, most of Manhattan has been destroyed in this war. Coupled with the huge number of casualties, it will also cost a lot of money to solve it smoothly. Less time. Thinking of this, Fury couldn't help but feel dizzy. But these are not things Chen Luo and the others need to consider. After saying goodbye to Fury, the next moment, when Chen Luo and his team appeared again, they had already arrived at the Skull Island base. Standing in front of the gate of the base, looking around, looking at the primitive scene around them and the huge amount of base in front of them. Except for a few people who had been here before, everyone else subconsciously opened their eyes wide, and their hearts shocked slightly. Everyone. At this time, Tony came in front of everyone, opened his arms, and said with a smile on his lips, "Welcome to our base. Oh, by the way, there's one more thing I forgot to tell you. This is also the home where King Kong grew up. If you want to visit this island in the future, wait until you see the island. After biology, I hope everyone is not too surprised. This is the Avengers headquarters." Chin Eason and Mutant, who had never been here before, as well as the Autobots who had stayed in another base prepared for them by Chen Luo for a long time, couldn't help but look around after seeing the scene around them. He started to look around, his face full of surprise. Quite an ancient aura. Behind Optimus Prime, RC, a scientist from the Autobot faction, leaned down and touched the ground with her palms. Along with a scan across the land below and the lush vegetation in front of her, RC was a little surprised. The sound sounded incredible. It seems that these plants only had traces of their existence tens of millions of years ago, and yet in this era, traces of them can actually be seen. Asking for flowers. This island looks like it existed in ancient times. Roar! As if to verify her words, the next moment, a roar of huge amounts of sound came from 1,000 meters in front of everyone. Along with this sound, deep in the dense forest ahead, a winding dragon seemed to finally wake up from its slumber and raised its head. From the beginning, a neck tens of meters long stretched out, towering into the clouds and straight into the distance. Boom! The ground shook slightly, and the sound of huge and heavy footsteps clearly appeared in everyone's ears. Looking at the figure of the winding dragon leaving from a distance, in the crowd, young people like Bobby, John all fell into a state of petrification. Am I right? That's a dinosaur? After rubbing their eyes vigorously and confirming again and again that they had seen correctly, gradually, a blush quickly appeared on their faces, and their eyes were filled with excitement. How cool! There are species like dinosaurs here. Am I really not watching a science fiction movie? The snakes and dragons have come out. So is there a Tyrannosaurus Rex here? I really want to see. I want to see the Aeolus pterosaur. Several young people were discussing excitedly on the sidelines, their eyes shining brightly as they looked around, looking a little eager to try. Is there an island that has always existed in ancient times? There is such an existence. Steve, who had not been to Skull Island with Fury and the others because he went to New York with Tony to track down Loki's whereabouts, also had his eyes wide open with disbelief on his face. Seeing the expression on Steve's face, Tony raised his eyebrows proudly and was about to show off in front of him. But before he could speak, Chen Luo's voice sounded. "Okay, you will have many opportunities to see these things in the future, but now it is time for us to get down to our business. This is the first Avengers meeting, so everyone needs to cheer up." Hearing this, everyone came back to their senses, looked in the direction of Chen Luo, and nodded gently, their faces full of seriousness. Seeing this, Chen Luo smiled, turned around, and walked towards the base gate behind him without saying anything else. The crowd followed closely, and not long after, they arrived at their destination. Chapter 480, Part 1. Here we are. Tony's voice sounded, and everyone's movements froze. They all looked up and looked ahead, looking at the building standing in front of them, with light shining in their eyes. In front of everyone, there was a tower about 100 meters high, covering an area of nearly 20,000 square meters. It looked like a huge watchtower. The building in the middle was horizontal and vertical, and only the top looked like a mushroom. The umbrella cover on the top looks particularly eye-catching. This building, named Avengers Building by Tony, is also the tallest building in the base. It is also located in the center of the base. On weekdays, members of the base work and the big cities gather here. However, their office areas are concentrated on dozens of floors below the top. As for the top area, Tony has specially reserved it for Avengers members like them, where regular meetings are held. After a brief tour of the building, Tony said nothing nonsense and immediately led everyone forward to the front desk. He first completed the registration procedures for Steve and other newcomers and entered relevant information to ensure that they would be able to work in the future. Can flow freely here. After doing all this, Tony led everyone to take the special elevator that went directly to the top floor, all the way to the top. Not long after, with a sharp ding, the elevator door slowly opened, and the situation inside the top floor finally emerged in front of everyone. The interior is wide and bright. In the huge semicircular building, countless bright and soft lights shine down, illuminating the interior like daylight. An inexplicable aura rushes towards the face, and everyone has not even had time to step out of the elevator door. Chi-Chi's movements froze, and a trace of astonishment flashed across their faces. After they got used to the light, the situation inside the conference room finally came into view. On the indoor ring-shaped wall, countless seats that look quite metallic and are somewhat similar in shape to medieval thrones are arranged in a circle, covering the surrounding walls and looking extremely magnificent. In addition to the densely packed seats on the wall, there is a vast white ground. In the center of the room, on this white ground, stands a circular high platform. On the high platform is a white gold table. The huge throne is even more eye-catching compared to other seats around it. Seeing the scene in the conference room, everyone turned to look at Tony with searching eyes. Everyone has seen it too. Tony didn't panic at all and started to explain. This is where our Avengers will hold meetings in the future, and the seats around it are prepared for everyone. Each of the seats contains your relevant information, and the seat number is related to the time when you enter the information just now. The smaller the number, the earlier you join the alliance. In addition, there are corresponding communication equipment connections on every seat. This is also to take care of the possibility that in the future, members who are away from home will be unable to participate in the meeting preparations, or members like King Kong and the Autobots who cannot participate in person due to their huge size. Everything during the meeting will be played simultaneously with other people who cannot be present in person. During the meeting, unless there is an emergency, please participate as much as possible. In addition, everything learned in the meeting must not be disclosed to anyone else except Avengers members. All matters discussed during the meeting need to be decided by vote. Listening to the various precautions listed by Tony, they are clear and logical. It is obviously a mature and feasible solution with extremely high credibility and feasibility. Looking at the complete buildings here and the island they are standing on at the moment, it is obvious that Chen Luo and Tony have already prepared for the formation of Avengers and are not as hasty as they thought. Thinking of this, everyone began to have a little more trust and recognition for this Avengers, which seemed to be a temporary component. Finally, after Tony finished talking about the corresponding precautions, today's main event came. That's probably it. Tony suddenly perked up, glanced at everyone, and said with a serious look on his face, "Now, the first Avengers meeting has officially begun." After that, without saying a word, Tony strode forward to the conference room in front, walked to the center of the room directly opposite the throne, and slowly stopped in front of the seat with the number 1 written on the back. Step down. Suddenly, a light lit up in the seat and swept across Tony's body, followed by the sound of metal synthesis. Number 1, Iron Man, Tony Stark. Welcome. As the voice fell, I saw the backrest that originally had the number 1 written on it. The number slowly faded away. Then, Tony's head slowly emerged from it, completely replacing the original number. At the same time, this also means that the owner of this chair has now been determined. Even if Tony dies due to some accident, this chair will always be reserved for him to record Iron Man's achievements for future Avengers. Praise! Seeing Tony's work, and then looking at the throne that was different from the other seats in the center of the room, everyone's eyes moved in the direction of Chen Luo. They all smiled and nodded, and then followed Tony's example and came to the take your seats one by one. Number 2, Hulk, Bruce Banner. Number 3, Thor Odin. Number 4, Blade. Number 10, Captain Steve Rogers. Number 23, Burning Man John. The first Avengers meeting, excluding Chen Luo, had a total of 23 Avengers members. Among them, Blade, Lucian, and Selena were affiliated with the Blood Clan camp. Dracula, Mavis, and Erica this time they just came to help and had no intention of joining in. So after the war ended, the three of them said goodbye to Chen Luo early and left. In addition to the Blood Clan camp, the Autobot faction also has only 3 finalists, namely Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, and RC. As for the camp with the largest number of people, it is undoubtedly the mutant team where Chen and the others are plus Logan. There are a full 1.3 or 8 people, accounting for about 1/3 of the existing members, which is very eye-catching. Together with Tony, Banner, Thor, Steve, and others, these people now constitute the first generation of Avengers members. Looking at the familiar faces in front of him, Chen Luo couldn't help but sigh. Compared with the plot in his memory, the current Avengers has undergone huge amounts of changes, but he still doesn't know whether this change is good or bad. But now is not the time to think about that. When Chen Luo came back to his senses, he glanced around at the people who were already sitting in their seats. Facing everyone's gaze, Chen Luo smiled slightly, kept walking, and strode forward to the huge throne in the center of the room. Come forward and take your seat slowly. No. Blood God, Chen Luo. Welcome. Chapter 481, Part 1. Dozens of eyes looked forward, looking at the figures sitting on the throne at the moment. Their eyes were full of recognition. Even from the moment he saw the throne in the room, even Steve, who had just met Chen Luo yesterday, did not have any objections in his heart. He nodded slightly and looked calm as usual. Not to mention other things. Among the first-generation Avengers members, except for Steve, Natasha Romanoff, and Hawkeye, who are the latest to join, the rest of them have a very deep relationship with Chen Luo. In this position, they are definitely supported unconditionally. Even if the relationship between Steve and Chen Luo is not as good as the former, when I think of Chen Luo's contribution in the previous battle, whether it is the 5 powerful demigods of the Chitauri clan or most of the Chitauri clan, the Terry soldiers were all dealt with by Chen Luo alone. No matter in terms of strength or contribution, they all know that apart from Chen Luo, no one else is qualified to sit in this position. So with the tacit understanding of everyone, Chen Luo naturally took the position that symbolized the leader of the Avengers. Looking at everyone, Chen Luo nodded slightly and said, "Well, everyone now, the meeting officially starts on the 27th. After saying this, the next moment, virtual screens appeared in front of everyone. Chen Luo's voice clearly appeared through the screen in everyone's ears, in case they could not hear clearly due to the distance. Let me tell you one thing first. Everyone already knows about this war. So how should we deal with the initiator of this war, Loki?" As soon as he finished speaking, almost at the same time, everyone looked in the direction of Thor. I know, Loki made a big mistake this time. Thor took a deep breath, stood up, and replied in a deep voice. But he belongs to our people of Asgard, so regarding Loki's crimes, I have to bring him to justice. Return to Asgard and accept your punishment. No. On the other side, Barton stood up with a gloomy face, stared in the direction of Thor, and retorted. This war started because of Loki. If it weren't for him, the Earth would not have suffered such huge amounts of casualties. So Loki must stay on Earth and accept human judgment. I agree. Steve also voted in agreement. Thor, Loki is the culprit who almost caused the entire Earth to be ruled by the Chitauri. He must pay the price for it. Loki is indeed guilty. Thor did not argue with this, but soon his next words made Barton and others stunned for a moment. But the most he is guilty of is opening the portal. Loki didn't personally do the casualties on Earth, did he? And I also asked Loki about the arrival of the Chitauri army. If it weren't for your private research on Rubik's Cube energy, how could it have attracted their attention? The Rubik's Cube back then was kept by us as Guardians, and it has been safe for thousands of years. It wasn't until you Earthlings took the Rubik's Cube away from us, because of your earthly ambitions, that the current troubles will arise. So if Loki, if you are guilty, you Earthlings should bear at least half of the blame. As soon as these words came out, Steve and Barton were speechless. Especially Steve, who had experienced World War II, naturally understood Thor's words better. The leader of Hydra at that time, Red Skull, found the whereabouts of Asgard's Rubik's Cube in a temple left by the Asgard people. He took the treasure from the hands of the Asgard people who were responsible for guarding it, and then used the energy of the Rubik's Cube. In weapons manufacturing, the war caused huge amounts of trouble. It is precisely because of this period of history that Fury, who knew its power, decided to rediscover the energy of the Rubik's Cube, hoping that through their research, the energy weapons that once dominated the battlefield could be revived. As luck would have it, it was because of Fury's decision that the Rubik's Cube was inadvertently activated while studying the Rubik's Cube. As the energy of the Rubik's Cube spread, this energy fluctuation instantly attracted Thanos' attention. Through this energy fluctuation, Thanos also determined the location of the space gem. With the intention of collecting the 6 infinite gems and realizing his wish, Thanos came up with the 3 lines of roadbed. So to a certain extent, Thor's statement is not unreasonable. If humans hadn't taken the initiative to die and come into contact with powers that they should not be exposed to at this level, Thanos' attention would not have been attracted. And finally, Zeta, the arrival of Rue's army. And in this series of events, the most embarrassing thing is that the Rubik's Cube was taken away from Asgard by humans. Although this incident was done by the villain Red Skull, he is also a member of humanity after all. He committed the sins committed by Red Skull, now need to be borne by humans. This has nothing to do with the stance of justice and evil, but the conflict between the two races. As a treasure belonging to the Asgard side, it is an undeniable fact that humans have taken it away from the Asgardians. If it were not for the coveting of the power of the Rubik's Cube, such a thing may not happen now. So to this extent, it seems that the sins and poisons in the 10 directions of the earth will become more concentrated. Wanting to understand this, the two of them looked at each other and sat back down again without saying a word. However, before Thor could breathe a sigh of relief, Tony's voice sounded. Thor, the human side is indeed responsible for this, but it is an undisputed fact that the portal was opened by Loki. If it weren't for him, there would not be such huge amounts of casualties on the human side. Since both parties are at fault, I don't think it's better to do this. You can take Loki away, but the Rubik's Cube will still be left to us for safekeeping, and we will not pursue Loki's guilt anymore. What do you think of this solution? No, I have to take the Rubik's Cube back with me too. Thor's eyes widened, and he argued. Haven't you learned a lesson from today's war? With the current power of your planet, there is no way you can continue to have a treasure like the Rubik's Cube. If something like today happens again, I won't be here to help you clean up your mess every time. Don't worry, Thor. Tony smiled and waved his hand, saying confidently, I'm sure that such an accident won't happen again this time. Having said this, Tony pointed his finger, moved his eyes in the direction of Chen Luo, and said slowly, if the Rubik's Cube is handed over to Chen Luo for safekeeping, do you think the previous problems will still occur? As soon as he said this, Thor subconsciously looked at Chen Luo, his eyes flashed slightly, and he was speechless. Chapter 482, Part 1. By this time, Thor finally understood what Tony was thinking. Why he insisted on taking the Rubik's Cube back to Asgard for safekeeping before, instead of leaving it on Earth, ultimately came down to his strength. If that's all in the past, it doesn't matter even if the Rubik's Cube is placed on the Earth. After all, Asgard doesn't value the Rubik's Cube as a treasure very much. After all, they already have Bifrost to realize the space teleportation ability of the Rubik's Cube, which can perfectly replace the function of the Rubik's Cube. And more importantly, the operability and safety of Bifrost are better than the Rubik's Cube. In addition, the candidates to control Bifrost are not as demanding as the Rubik's Cube. It only requires the demigod level to do it. After all these factors, it brought the Rubik's Cube to a point where no one cares about it. After all, the Rubik's Cube, to be precise, is the space gem contained in the Rubik's Cube. It is a treasure that only the powerful gods can master perfectly. Now in the entire Asgard, perhaps only the god King Odin can use it. For Odin, firstly, Asgard has a more convenient Bifrost. Secondly, due to his physical condition, there are not many opportunities to use gems. Moreover, with Thor's strength, they cannot successfully master this treasure. So even if the gem is brought back, it will probably be sealed in a treasure house in the end. But for now, as the god-level powerhouse in the universe, the Mad Titan, Thanos, sets his sights on the Earth. With the current strength of the Earth, it is undoubtedly unrealistic to continue to preserve this infinite gems. It is precisely with this in mind that the reason why Thor wants to bring the Rubik's Cube back to Asgard for safekeeping is, in a sense, to ensure the safety of the Earth. At least that's what he thought before. However, after hearing Tony's suggestion, Thor suddenly realized that there is still a strong demigod like Chen Luo on the Earth. It would be a good idea to hand over the Rubik's Cube to him for safekeeping. Even though Chen Luo is only as powerful as a demigod now, he has no chance of winning against a god like Thanos. But in any case, the Earth is also within the protection of Asgard. With his father's intimidation, Thanos may not dare to come to the Earth in person. Otherwise, what awaits him may be a real divine battle. Facing a veteran god like Odin, Thanos will not take action easily before he is completely sure. Just like today, even if he learned that there was an infinite gems on the Earth, he would only send an army to snatch it in the end. Judging from the example of today's war, the opponents that the Earth has to face are only at the level of demigods at the highest level, and Chen Luo's strength is fully capable of dealing with opponents of this level. Recalling everything that happened today, Thor could feel a heavy pressure in his heart regarding Chen Luo's strength. You must know that Chen Luo first fought a battle with him and Hulk, and then slaughtered 5 demigods one after another. Such strength is undoubtedly far superior to him. Even in Asgard, Chen Luo's strength may be, and only under his father. Considering the time when he became a demigod, there is no doubt that this is a perfect seed of a god king. Just like him and the night demon who was killed by Chen Luo before, they are all seed players who are very likely to grow into powerful gods in the future. Whether it is growth speed or their own ability, they must be one higher than the same level of powerful players. Even several levels, the combat power is amazing, and even fighting across levels is a breeze. Take Chen Luo as an example. Not long after he became a demigod, he was able to go to Jotunheim alone to hunt for those elementary demigods before he even reached the initial level of demigod. Good proof. In addition to being able to meet Thor's standards in terms of strength, Chen Luo also has a good relationship with him. Thor naturally has a considerable degree of trust in Chen Luo. After considering all these factors, Thor finally changed his original idea and gently nodded. If it is handed over to Chen for safekeeping, then I have no objection. Okay. Tony nodded with satisfaction, turned to look at everyone, and suggested, "Everyone, we can make a decision now. Hand over the Rubik's Cube to Chen Lai for safekeeping, and then agree to let Thor take Luigi away. Do you agree or oppose this proposal?" Upon hearing this, everyone else looked at each other and raised their hands in unison. "I agree. Agree. I have no opinion." Including Natasha Romanoff-Barton, the SHILD agent, did not express any objection at this moment. On the contrary, after learning that the Rubik's Cube would be handed over to Chen Luo for safekeeping, they all breathed a sigh of relief. To be honest, even if they are now working in S.H.I.E.L.D., they still know very well what caused this war. If it weren't for the fact that their director Nick Fury wanted to develop energy weapons, he would conduct research on the Rubik's Cube. It was also because of this that the energy of the space gem would be inadvertently stimulated, which would be noticed by Thanos, leading to the occurrence of this war. If the Rubik's Cube is handed over to SHIELD for safekeeping this time, according to the temperament of their director, they may not let it go. If a situation like today happens again, then they will be really in trouble. Instead of doing this, it is better to hand over the Rubik's Cube to Chen Luo for safekeeping, and the possibility of accidents will be greatly reduced. Even if someone covets this treasure in the future, it will be much safer than SHIELD with a strong demigod like Chen Luo guarding it. So with this idea in mind, Avengers made their first proposal, which was unanimously approved by everyone present. Seeing everyone raising their hands in agreement, Chen Luo nodded and agreed. In that case, it's decided. Tesseract, I will take care of it from now on. I will do my best to ensure its safety. After defeating Loki and successfully closing the portal, the Rubik's Cube had already fallen into his hands, and then he and the Psychic Scepter in his hand were placed in the same store as the Infinity Gauntlet. In just one day, Chen Luo successfully collected 2 infinite gems. Chen Luo, who knew a lot about infinite gems ability, naturally had no idea of returning them. This time, even if Tony didn't bring it up, he would. Way to leave it behind. If it weren't for the fact that he, Hao Nono, is currently holding the Avengers' first meeting with others and has other things to deal with, I'm afraid he would have wanted to give it a try now. What is the power of those 2 infinite gems? How big? Because he already has the Infinity Gauntlet in his hand. What he has to do next is very simple. He just needs to take out these 2 gems and then insert them into the groove of the glove. In this way, he will have the opportunity to truly experience the realm above the demigods and exclusive to the gods. Although he couldn't wait, the meeting was not over yet, so Chen Luo cheered up and continued to ask, "Now that the first matter has been decided, do you have any other matters that need to be dealt with now? If not, this meeting can be over." Everyone looked at each other and were silent for a moment. Then, Steve slowly stood up and said in a deep voice, "I have another idea here." Chapter 483, Part 1. Although we won this war, the human side also suffered huge amounts of losses. Humanity's current strength is not enough to deal with a war of this level. So I wonder if we should think of ways to increase our strength. Only if we have enough ability will we have the opportunity to take the initiative in possible wars in the future. Just like today's war, without Chen Luo's existence, how can we resist the invasion of the Chitauri army with our strength? After hearing Steve's thoughts, everyone's faces gradually became serious at a speed visible to the naked eye. They looked at each other and nodded silently. If they hadn't had such an idea before, after all, with their strength, they are all powerful people standing at the top of the earth. Even beings like Natasha Romanoff and Barton are powerful people who have touched the limits of the human body. The reason why they seem very ordinary here is because the others are too strong, which does not mean how weak they really are. Everyone has always been confident in their own strength. But in today's war, when they came into contact with the terrifying strength of the alien race, they finally woke up. To be honest, in this war, without Chen Luo's existence, mankind would definitely have suffered much more damage than it does now. There is even a real possibility that the entire Earth will be conquered by it, as Loki said. Although they escaped such a fate this time, who can guarantee that there will not be a second alien army coming in the future? Maybe there will be a being stronger than Chen Luo among them. When then, will they have to? Is it easy to catch someone like this? Thinking of this, everyone's beliefs became firmer and they all agreed with Steve's proposal. The captain is right. In order to prevent possible crises in the future, we do need to make some preparations. Tony also rarely disagreed with Steve this time. He nodded first, affirming the other party's proposal, but then he asked, "But I would like to ask, what should we do to truly improve our strength? Do you have any ideas?" The whole audience fell silent, and they all had a headache when they thought of Tony's question. For Aurora and Mutant, the way to improve their ability is very simple. As they grow, their abilities can also be enhanced accordingly, and they can explore various uses of ability or strengthen their control over ability. However, in addition to the latter two of these methods, which can be strengthened through exercise, the former is also the most important point, because from the day they are born, there is a corresponding upper limit for their ability growth. When they grow to adulthood, their ability will also reach the limit. At the peak, unless there are other opportunities in the future, their ability will not be able to break through its own limits. Take Chen and the others as an example. Chen's potential is absolutely unlimited in Mutant. If she develops smoothly, she will most likely grow into a powerful person at the level of a god in the future. But it is a little different for mutants like Shadowcat Katie. With her potential, I am afraid that the extraordinary level is already the upper limit of her growth. When she reaches the peak, not to mention the level of gods, even demigods will not be able to reach it. Therefore, the upper limit of mutant strength has been determined since their birth, and it is difficult to change it the day after tomorrow. Now among the mutants of Chen and his party, with their potential, they are also the absolute top among the mutants. It can even be said that most of these people have the potential to grow into demigods, but if they want to truly take this step, I have no clue at all. After all, most of them are now adults, and their own strength has already reached the peak of what they can achieve. Although there is still room for further exploration of their potential, without this key that can unlock their potential, they can only stay where they are. Step forward, there is no possibility of going any further. Except for mutants, the Autobots' way to improve their strength is simpler, by upgrading their bodies or replacing them with stronger weapons. As silicon-based life forms, the way they improve their strength is completely different from that of carbon-based life forms. They do not need to tap into their own potential. With their built-in computing chips, as long as they are given suitable weapons, their power can be rocket-like. Improvement, and the ability to perfectly exert one's own power, without even a familiar process. Just like the Duke who was transformed by Chen Luo before, and the battleship that the demigod was riding on, just as soon as the transformation was successful, he directly had the strength to surpass Optimus Prime and his party. Compared with carbon-based life forms like Chen Luo, the car people improve in strength much faster than they do. But there is still a question. That is, can weapons that can enhance their strength be successfully manufactured with the current technological level of the Earth? In addition to this, even if they master the technology to make more advanced weapons, it is still unknown how much money they will spend to make them. Without enough financial resources, even if they want to improve the strength of the Autobots, it will probably be too much. Weakheart. In addition to these two races, not to mention monsters like Hulk, it is also very difficult for Steve, Natasha Romanoff, and others to improve their strength. Their strength is a combination of their physical fitness and fighting skills. After so many years of fighting, they have nothing to improve in terms of skills, and their physical fitness is also enhanced through injections of serum. If they want to become stronger, ordinary exercise has no effect on them. Thinking of this, most of the people present frowned, and the atmosphere became even more silent for a while. However, if you want to improve your strength, there is nothing you can do. At this time, Tony's voice sounded again, instantly attracting everyone's attention. Hearing this, everyone raised their heads and looked in Tony's direction. "Tony, do you have any idea?" "Well, you've got the wrong person." Tony shook his head with a smile, pointed in the direction of Chen Luo, and said unhurriedly, "But if it's Chen, he may be able to help you, but that's not necessarily true." Hearing this, Chen Luo's eyes flashed, and he immediately understood what Tony meant. Tony is right. I do have a way to improve everyone's strength. Seeing everyone's eyes light up, Chen Luo continued. "But I have agreed in advance that you may not be willing to accept my method." Then Chen Luo didn't hide anything and immediately spoke out about his Dafa. "Actually, the method is very simple. If you are willing to accept my blood and transform it into Blood Clan, your strength will be improved." As soon as the words fell, the next moment, the whole place fell into silence again. Chapter 484, Part 1. Everyone's eyes were all looking in the direction of Chen Luo, and their thoughts were swirling in their hearts. To be honest, if Chen Luo hadn't suddenly mentioned this matter, they would have even forgotten the identity of Chen Luo Blood Clan. Now think about it carefully. As Chen Luo said, if they can transform into the Blood Clan, their strength will definitely be improved by huge amounts. Not to mention anything else, the terrifying resilience possessed by members of the Blood Clan, which is beyond ordinary people, and the lifespan that is comparable to that of the Acer Protoss, are probably comparable to those present, including Hulk and Logan. In addition to restoring ability, Blood Clan can quickly replenish its physical strength by sucking blood even after a large amount of physical exhaustion. This can be seen from the performance of Chen Luo and Blade in the previous war. And that's not the main thing. The most important thing is that after being transformed by Chen Luo's blood that integrates the blood of the Ghost King, they still have the opportunity to awaken their own blood ghost skills, just like Serena's wind control ability, which has huge amounts of development potential. Theoretically speaking, this kind of blood clan developed from Chen Luo's own bloodline. Their upper limit of ability is closely related to Chen Luo. Now, because Chen Luo is only at the demigod level, other blood clan can reach the peak of the extraordinary. But if Chen Luo successfully breaks through to the gods, then Serena and the others will have the possibility to go further. It can be said that as long as Chen Luo is stronger, theoretically speaking, there is no upper limit to the development potential of other blood clan. Such characteristics are much stronger than the mutant clan, whose upper limit is determined from birth. Except for a few mutants with unlimited potential like Qin and Wanda, most of the other mutants cannot compare with the blood clan in terms of potential. Thinking of the various benefits of becoming the blood clan, everyone present had to admit that if they were willing to transform, their strength would definitely be improved by leaps and bounds. But even so, everyone still remained silent, and they all fell into a tangle in their hearts. The reason is also very simple. Why did Tony, who knew that as long as Chen Luo was willing to take action and transform himself into the blood clan, could be rescued from palladium poisoning, did not directly accept Chen Luo's proposal, but decided to find a way to solve his own problem on his own? The reason is, because of the reluctance to give up the identity of human beings. But this is not surprising. After all, they have been human beings for decades and have long been accustomed to living as humans. It is normal for them to be unable to accept their transformation into another race for a while. And because blood clan also needs to suck blood regularly as nutrients necessary to maintain body functions, this is somewhat beyond their acceptance range. As a normal human being, the various conflicts caused by the differences between the two races, it will also make them naturally resistant. Unlike ordinary people who aspire to possess great power and long lifespan, although there may be differences in strength among the people present, since they can be absorbed into becoming a member of the Avengers, they are naturally proud of being superheroes. If the prerequisite for them to gain strength is to make them give up their original race, or even let them accept those habits that they could not accept before, then they would rather not use this method. Seeing the room suddenly become silent, Chen Luo shook his head. A trace of helplessness flashed across his face. It seems that everyone has already made a decision. Chen Luo was not surprised by such a result. When he said these words, he never thought that they would agree. Just like Tony back then, as long as he did not reach the final point of no retreat, even though he knew what kind of power he could have by becoming the blood clan, he still chose to give up. After understanding everyone's choice, Chen Luo did not dwell on it, but quickly changed the topic. Since this method doesn't work, then maybe we can try another method. Having said this, Chen Luo turned to look in Tony's direction and expressed his thoughts. The current situation is already obvious. Except for a few people like Thor and Qin who still have further potential, most of the others have grown to their own limits. If there is no external intervention, it will be extremely difficult to make progress in the future. Since there is no way to improve one's own strength, in Chen Luo's opinion, it is better to think of ways to improve weapons and equipment like the Autobots. If they can upgrade their equipment, it can also enhance everyone's strength from the side. Just like Tony, when it comes to his own physical fitness, he is just an ordinary person, but when he wears that steel battle suit, the strength he can exert is comparable to that of an extraordinary powerhouse. Please give me flowers. Such huge amounts of span all reflect the importance of equipment. Since we are talking about upgrading equipment, who can be more suitable than Tony, the weapons master? Regardless of his previous role as a weapons developer or his super genius IQ, it can be said that as long as he is given a certain amount of time and with his ability, he will be able to complete this task perfectly. Although it is unrealistic for Tony to build a steel battle suit like he did for himself, even simply upgrading other people's equipment can greatly improve their strength. Regarding this, Chen Luo, there was never any doubt. Even strong men like Qin and others who rely on their own abilities to fight, if they could be equipped with equipment suitable for them, their strength can also be greatly improved. Just like the little Spider-Man in Chen Luo's memory, after Tony valued him and built a spider battlesuit for him, and combined with his own ability, it also played a very good role. Since there is such a precedent, Chen Luo can naturally be sure that his idea is definitely very feasible. Not only him, after understanding Chen Luo's thoughts, everyone present was not as entangled as before. Their eyes lit up and they all looked in the direction to follow. As for Tony's ability, even Steve, who has always been cool with him, has to admit that the opponent's steel battle suit is indeed an amazing invention. If Tony is willing to help them make equipment, it will improve their strength. There must be considerable benefits. Tony, what do you think of this proposal? After listening to Chen Luo's suggestion, although Tony himself felt that it would be simpler and more effective to let Chen Luo take action and directly transform others into blood clan, he could also understand their choice. After all, even he didn't do it in the first place. He also rejected Chen Luo's proposal, so he was also mentally prepared for this. Since this method doesn't work, as Chen Luo thought, the only way left is to upgrade equipment for everyone. And regarding this, Tony is confident there is absolutely no one else present who can compare with him. After thinking about this, Tony nodded and agreed without hesitation. Then leave it to me. Chapter 485, Part 1. After this proposal was passed, the Avengers' first meeting finally came to an end. After walking out of the meeting room, under the leadership of Tony, everyone gathered in the base cafeteria. After having dinner together, some people began to say goodbye one after another. First there are Steve, Natasha Romanoff, and Barton. Fury, who has been busy for a long time, will not let these three bright workers go. He started urging the three people to come back to help as early as after the meeting. So even for this ancient era, the island was very curious, and in the end they had to suppress their curiosity and chose to return. After sending the three people back to Fury, Thor also stepped forward and said goodbye to Chen Luo and others. You want to leave too? Looking at Thor in front of him, Tony opened his eyes wide and asked with some confusion. What about Loki? Aren't you going to take him back with you? No. You mistakenly met 760! Thor shook his head and said, I am going to see my girlfriend this time. It has been some time since I left last time. I also need to be with you. It will take him a few days. So in the past few days, I'll ask you to take care of that guy Lou. After saying this, without waiting for Tony's reply, Thor laughed loudly, quickly spun Mjolnir in his hand, and then rose into the sky. White air waves erupted in the air and disappeared in an instant. Next came Optimus Prime and his entourage. Now that the war is over, although there are no casualties among the Autobots, many have suffered minor or serious injuries and need to return to the base for repairs. Chen Luo naturally had no reason to refuse. After using teleportation to send Optimus Prime and the others back to the base, before Chen Luo could take a breath, he saw Chen coming over with other mutants. Wait a minute, Chen. Do you want to leave too? Seeing Chen Luo's somewhat troubled expression, Chen showed a gentle smile, nodded slightly, and said, Now that the war is over, it's time for me to take these children back. After all, they have classes tomorrow. As soon as he finished speaking, bursts of wailing sounded from behind. No! Teacher Chen. John looked collapsed, holding his head in his hands, looking around with eyes filled with reluctance. This island is so fun. We haven't had a good tour yet. Can you wait until we stay here for a few days before leaving? Teacher. Behind Chen, Shadowcat Katie pulled her sleeves. A trace of expectation flashed across her pretty face. Can we stay here for a few days? I want to see what dinosaurs look like. Yes, teacher. Poppy also shouted from the side. Anyway, teacher, you and Uncle Chen haven't been together for a while. Isn't now a good opportunity? Before he finished speaking, Chen suddenly turned around and glared at the little guys. Feeling the aura rising from his teacher, they subconsciously shrank their heads and had no more words. Seeing this, Chinkai turned to look at Chen Luo again and said with a smile, Let's talk about it when we have a chance in the future. If they perform well in the future, I will bring them here again. But now, it's better for us to go back first. The professor has been waiting for us for a long time. We have to go back early so that the professor can feel at ease. After hearing this, Poppy and the others still felt a little pity, but when they thought that they would have the opportunity to come back here in the future, they temporarily put aside their thoughts and planned to return to school with their teacher first. Okay, Chen Luo sighed. Although he was a little reluctant, he didn't try to stay. However, he had already made plans in his heart. After the things here were settled, it would be time to go back to the academy. After sending Chen and the other mutants back to the academy, when Chen Luo returned again, there were only a limited number of people left on the island. King Kong and Rhodes left together. They hadn't seen each other for a while, and Rhodes also planned to spend some time with King Kong. Blade and others returned to their rooms to rest. As for Banner, because his laboratory in New York was destroyed by the war, he simply stayed here, planning to wait until his clone was successfully cultivated, and then let Chen Luo separate him from Hulk before leaving. Tony also returned to his room. Since he had promised others to help them upgrade their equipment, it could be imagined that he would be very busy in the next period of time. Now there is only the last person left waiting for Chen Luo to come back. Selena. Chen Luo came to the other party with a smile on his face. I'm back. Raising her head and looking at Chen Luo in front of her, Serena's cold face like an iceberg gradually melted, and a trace of tenderness flashed in her bright eyes. Without saying a word, she came to Chen Luo and leaned against Chen Luo. Chest. Open your hands and hold each other tightly in your arms. The two figures are close to each other under the moonlight, standing quietly in place, quiet and harmonious. A night of silence. At noon the next day, Chen Luo lazily woke up from the bed. Without disturbing Serena, who continued to sleep, she gently opened the door and walked out. Tony. After a while, Chen Luo came to the door of Tony's room, knocked on the door gently, and said, "Come in." Chen Luo opened the door and saw the scene inside the house. He couldn't help but smile and said, "You guys are really hard-working. Looking at you like this, have you worked all night? Why, after that battle yesterday, you were so hard-working. Didn't you take a good rest? You still have the nerve to say it?" Hearing this, Tony raised his head, opened his eyes full of dark circles, and said angrily, "You two made so much noise last night, and I am so close to your room. Do you think I can still sleep?" Speaking of this, Tony's eyes changed. He looked at Chen Luo, gritted his teeth, and said, "SH*T. You guy, you don't know what Chen and Serena like you. You know you're a playboy, but you actually I don't mind either. Why on earth is this? I think you're just jealous." Chen Luo raised the corners of his mouth and smiled proudly. He went to the refrigerator very familiarly, took out a bottle of beer, then sat down on the sofa behind him, drank the beer, and asked casually, "How are you doing here? Do you have any ideas about other people's weapons and equipment?" "Almost." Tony shrugged, stretched, took out a bottle of beer from the refrigerator, and came to sit next to Chen Luo. "There are already several good ideas, and maybe we will be able to produce samples soon." "Why? Is this why you came to me? This is your domain? I have nothing to do with this." Chen Luo waved his hand, then sat up straight, looked at Tony. His face gradually became serious, and said in a deep voice, "The reason why I came to you is for another thing. To be precise, this is the trouble caused by Obadiah." "Huh?" Tony frowned, feeling a little curious. What on earth is going on? Chen Luo didn't talk nonsense about this, and immediately told the other party about Wanda's situation. Chapter 486, Part 1. "So, those two children are here to seek revenge from me?" After listening to Chen Luo's story, Tony's mouth twitched slightly, and he was speechless. Chen Luo nodded, patted the other party's shoulder, and said seriously, "No matter what, they are all victims of the weapons produced by your company, aren't they? Although it was not you who gave the order, Obadiah is dead now, so you still need to take part of the responsibility. After all, haven't we already felt the harm that war has brought us just now?" Tony paused after hearing the words. Yesterday's tragic scenes appeared in his mind. Thinking of this, Tony's face finally became serious, and he nodded heavily and responded, "I understand. I will explain it to them." "And compensation?" Chen Luo did not forget to remind him. "This kind of thing can't be solved by just apologizing." "Compensation?" Tony frowned and said hesitantly, "Chen, what do you need me to do? They have gone through something like that. I don't know what I should do to compensate them. Is it possible? Let me adopt them?" "Stop dreaming." Chen Luo rolled his eyes. "Now that they have joined my side, they will be my people from now on. Do you understand? The compensation I'm talking about is whether you can tailor-make equipment for them after their ability awakening." "Equipment?" Tony was stunned, as if he thought of something, and looked at Chen Luo thoughtfully. "Chen, do you think you were so optimistic about them?" Facing Tony's question, Chen Luo did not give a direct answer. He smiled mysteriously and said, "You will know this later, but don't forget the promise you made just now. Wanda and the others." Okay, I understand." Tony waved his hand and said solemnly, "In a few days, when my work here is finished, I will go and talk to those two children. Is there anything else you can do? If not, I will continue to work. The door is right behind you, so walk away without waiting." Facing Tony's behavior of chasing people away, Chen Luo still had a smile on his face. Since the other party had agreed to his affairs here, there was no reason for him to stay here any longer. After waving goodbye to the other party, he immediately exited the room, walked towards the distance. Time flies. A week later, except for Banner and King Kong, who still stayed on the island, everyone else was taken away by Chen Luo and returned to New York. Selena returned to the Western Station with the Nightcrawler troops who had been waiting here for a long time. Rhodes returned to the military base to report. As for Blade, Lucian, and others, they stayed in the still dilapidated Manhattan area to cooperate with the group members and participate in Chen. The latest headquarters under Lu's command is under construction. Now a week has passed since the war. Regarding the reconstruction of the headquarters, after getting in touch with Chen Luo, Craven had already arranged for manpower to rebuild. It is also worth mentioning that this time the reconstruction of their headquarters has reached a deeper cooperation with Tony's Stark group. After discussion between Chen Luo and Tony, they finally decided to expand again based on the original locations of the two groups' headquarters. Taking advantage of the fact that the entire Manhattan area is now in ruins, the two joint ventures spent a lot of money to successfully buy about 20 miles of land around it, and then built a brand new ecological park based on the reconstruction of the group headquarters. The reason why they chose to do this is also related to the two people's next plan for the Avengers. Although the base on Skull Island is secretive enough and safe enough due to the influence of external environmental conditions, that base also has corresponding limitations. Because the distance is too far, unless it is a meeting that has been decided long ago, it can be held there. If an emergency occurs, They will not have the time to travel back and forth. As for letting Chen Luo use teleportation to take everyone there, once or twice is okay. If it happens every time, then Chen Luo, the leader, is too unqualified. Therefore, taking into account the convenience and distance factors, the two of them unanimously decided to use this rebuilt park as the second stronghold of the Avengers. After all, most of the Avengers are now gathered in the city of New York. If something goes wrong, it won't take long to gather here. The most important thing is that Chen Luo knows very well that this city is known as the center of the Earth. A series of major events that will happen on the Earth in the future are almost all related to this city. Therefore, if there is an emergency, there is a base here. Make it easier for everyone to take action. After arranging all this, Thor finally ended his vacation on the same day. After saying goodbye to his girlfriend, he returned to Chen Luo. Then he said hello to Chen Luo, Tony, and the others, and took Loki back to Asgard. In an open space outside the city, looking at the huge amounts of circular mark left in front of him, Tony looked up at the sky and couldn't help but said curiously, "Asgard, if possible, would you really like to see what it looks like? Isn't that simple?" Chen Luo raised his eyebrows, patted the other party's shoulder, and said with a smile, "As long as you solve Wanda's matter, I will take you over to have a look." "You." Tony came back to his senses and looked at him suspiciously. "Hey, who do you look down on?" Looking at the other party's suspicious eyes, Chen Luo rolled his eyes, patted his chest, and said proudly, "Have you forgotten? I have been there once. And Heimdall and I have a pretty good relationship. If I just take you around, I don't think you would refuse." "Ah, yes, yes." Tony couldn't help but nodded, curled his lips, and did not answer Chen Luo's words. The mask on his head fell again, and the dazzling flame 080 appeared under his feet, and his body slowly floated in the sky. "Okay, now that things here have been settled, it's time to meet the two children." After hearing this, Chen Luo also quickly entered the state, nodded, slowly lifted into the air, and took Tony with him to fly towards the base where Wanda and her brother were staying these days. After an hour, it is about a few miles away from Xavier's school. More than 10 years ago, after Chen Luo and Magneto reached an agreement, this is a base specially built by Chen Luo to house the mutants he found from various places. Now more than 10 years have passed, and with the influx of foreign population, the base has been continuously expanded and finally formed a small town. In this town, most of them are members of the Blood Clan under Chen Luo, as well as mutants who have grown up since childhood. As for humans, they only account for a small part, and these humans are reluctant to let go of their mutant children and choose to follow them. I came here to live here, so my attitude toward the mutant family is very friendly. In addition, the existence of Xavier's school, not far from here, also makes this place safer than other bases. Academy members also like to walk here on weekdays, and the relationship between the two parties is very close. After deciding to take Wanda in, Chen Luo placed her here to live until today. A week later, he finally came to the door. Chapter 487, Part 1. At the edge of the town, next to a lake, a white building sits on it. This building is divided into 3 floors, with a wooden structure. The outside of the wooden house is painted with a layer of milky white paint. In front of the door is a small platform located above the lake. As the sunlight shines down, it makes the building in front of you even more beautiful. The building is covered with a layer of warm light and looks exceptionally harmonious. "This is the home you prepared for those 2 children?" Looking at the wooden house in front of him, Tony raised his eyebrows and said, "It looks really good. If you retire in the future, this might be a good place." "Retirement?" Chen Luo raised the corner of his mouth slightly. "Don't even think about it. As long as I'm here, even if one day you are too old to get out of bed, I will drag you out of bed to work." "What did you say?" Tony stared, looked at Chen Luo angrily and funny, and said helplessly, "I've been unlucky for 8 lifetimes to know you. I'm a good group boss, and I have to experience it with you. It feels like going to work." Chen Luo laughed a few times and slapped Tony on the shoulder hard. "There's nothing we can do about it. After all, you are the smartest guy I know. Without your help, I really don't know what I would do." "Come on." Tony rolled his eyes and raised the corner of his mouth slightly. "Banner doesn't need me to be any worse. Even if I retire, it's enough to have Banner around, right? This is different." Chen Luo shook his head and looked at Tony seriously. "Tony, your role cannot be replaced by anyone. Not just me. We all need you too." Facing Chen Luo's gaze, Tony was slightly startled, feeling warm in his heart, but he didn't say anything, shook his head, and walked towards the wooden house in front of him. "We'll talk about this later. Now, we have other things to be busy with." Watching Tony leave, Chen Luo smiled, strode forward, and came to Tony's side. Not long after, the two came to the door of the wooden house. Chen Luo stretched out his hand and knocked gently on the door. "Wanda, Pietro, it's me." As soon as the words fell, the two of them didn't wait long. The next moment, there was a burst of rapid footsteps, and then the door opened instantly. "Mr. Chen Luo, you..." A beautiful and moving face appeared in front of the two of them. Wanda opened the door and was about to speak. However, before she could finish speaking, her attention was instantly attracted by the figure next to Chen Luo. "Are you Wanda?" Looking at Wanda in front of him, Tony seemed to understand something. He couldn't help but glance at Chen Luo beside him, his eyes full of meaning. "Tony Stark!" Looking at Tony's familiar face, Wanda's expression suddenly changed, her brows furrowed, her body tensed instantly, and her face was full of hostility. Seeing Wanda's reaction, Tony's smile froze. He scratched his head with a headache and subconsciously looked at Chen Luo. "Wanda!" Chen Luo also spoke at the right time. "I have brought him to you, so the rest is up to you to negotiate with him. Don't worry, Tony will give you an explanation." As he spoke, Chen Luo slowly backed away. "Then you guys have a nice chat and I won't interrupt you. I just have something to do here. I'll come back when you guys are done talking." After saying that, Chen Luo turned around and instantly rose into the sky, setting off gusts of wind. In just a blink of an eye, he disappeared. Chen Luo. Watching Chen Luo disappear from the same place, Tony's eyes widened for a moment, and he cursed a few times in his mind, but he still had to bite the bullet and turned to look in the direction of Wanda. "Wanda, I already understand your situation, but I still have to explain to you that at that time, the Stark Group." As for how Tony should explain to Wanda and the two, Chen Luo has no idea. Although he felt sorry for his good friend by leaving Tony behind like this, he couldn't help much in the current situation. Maybe because of the relationship between him and Tony, it would cause unnecessary conflicts between Wanda and Wanda. Misunderstand. So it would be better to simply leave the space to Tony to develop on his own. Based on his understanding of Tony, Chen Luo is confident that his good friend will solve the problem perfectly. As for himself, now that he finally came to the academy, Chen Luo would not forget that there was someone waiting for him at the academy. The figure of Qin appeared in his mind. Thinking of the other party, Chen Luo's heart moved and disappeared instantly. When Chen Luo appeared again next to the wooden house where Wanda was, it was already dusk, the sun was gradually setting, and the sunset was hanging in the sky, like thin ribbons, decorating the entire sky. Arriving at the door of the wooden house, Chen Luo stretched out his hand and knocked on the door again. Then when the door opened, I walked into the room and saw three familiar figures all standing out. And unlike the tense situation when they first met, the relationship between Tony and Wanda is now visibly relaxed. I don't know what Tony said to them, but the result is obvious. For Tony, Wanda no longer had the initial hostility. Ignoring Tony's look that wanted to kill Deadman, and giving him an approving look, Chen Luo came to Wanda and said softly, "Wanda, it seems that the misunderstanding between you has been resolved, right? So what are your plans next?" Hearing this, Wanda subconsciously turned her head and looked at Pietro. A trace of confusion flashed in their eyes. But this confusion did not last long. Soon, Wanda seemed to understand something and looked at Chen Luo seriously. "Mr. Chen Luo, if possible, we still want to get the power." Li-Li-Zo. Chen Luo raised his eyebrows and said with interest, "Why is this? You should also understand that your real enemy, Obadiah, is dead, and I have already sent people to deal with the group of mercenaries who invaded your hometown. Even if you gain power, you no longer need to seek revenge. So can you tell me the reason why you made this decision?" Wanda bit her lip, looked at Chen Luo with a firm expression, and said, "Mr. Chen Luo, if possible, can you leave those mercenaries to us? We want to avenge our mother with our own hands." "This is definitely possible," Chen Luo nodded. "But from the look of you, you want to get power? There should be other reasons, right?" Facing Chen Luo's gaze, Wanda nodded heavily, then looked in Pietro's direction and spoke out her reasons. Chapter 488, Part 1. "Mr. Chen Luo, Tony has told us just now that there may still be wars like before on our planet in the future, right?" After saying this, Wanda had no intention of letting Chen Luo answer, and then said to herself, "If something like that happens again, how can we ensure our safety if we are still ordinary people? So we must have enough power to protect Pietro and me from harm." Speaking of this, Wanda suddenly raised her head, her bright eyes flashing brightly, and she looked at Chen Luo with serious eyes. "And Pietro and I were rescued by you, Mr. Chen Luo. If we have enough ability, if you encounter any danger in the future, sir, we can also find a way to help you. Now that we have chosen to join, we also hope that we can play our part." Looking at the other party's firm eyes, Chen Luo turned his head and looked behind Wanda. When he saw the silver-haired boy behind him also looking at him longingly, he was silent for a moment, and then finally nodded slowly. "Now that you have made your decision, I respect your ideas. Before you get the power of 863, we will not touch those people, and we will leave it to you to deal with it yourself. As for how to get you strength, I do have a way." At this point, Chen Luo's voice paused, and he seemed a little hesitant. "But this method may have some dangers. Please don't worry." Wanda's eyes lit up, and she quickly said, "We have been mentally prepared for a long time. and we believe in you seeing the light in the other person's eyes. Chen Luo was stunned for a moment, then nodded slowly. In that case, you guys stay here for a while, and when I communicate with the other side, you can go over, etc. At this time, Tony stood up, looked at Chen Luo with some surprise, and asked doubtfully, Chen, since they want to get power, is it safer to use yours instead of yours? Why don't you transform them directly? Also, what method did you just think of? Tony was also very confused about what Chen Luo said just now. After all, he knew that as long as Chen Luo was willing to transform the two of them into the Blood Clan, they would immediately gain powerful power, and there would be no need to worry about any danger. Anyway, the last people Wanda and the others want to take revenge on were just ordinary people. This kind of power is completely sufficient, so why let them take unknown risks to try other methods? Transformation? When Pietro heard this, he subconsciously turned his head and looked at Chen Luo curiously. Want to know? Facing the curious eyes of the two little ones, Chen Luo smiled and said with interest, In this case, I will satisfy your curiosity today. After a pause, Chen Luo did not hide it from the two of them, and told them the fact that he was a blood clan. Vampire? Seeing the two sharp teeth that suddenly protruded from the corner of Chen Luo's mouth, the two of them were stunned and instantly stood on the same spot. Does this kind of creature really exist? After reacting, Pietro suddenly opened his eyes wide, his face flushed with excitement, and he kept jumping up and down on the ground, looking very excited. Even the usually quiet Wanda is like this. In any case, Wanda and her sister are only around 20 years old. They are naturally curious about mysterious species, such as vampires and werewolves. Now that they see a living vampire appearing in front of them, they will be so excited. This reaction is not surprising. Wait a minute. At this time, the two of them suddenly reacted. Doesn't that transformation mean that we also become vampires? Seeing the slightly changed expressions of the two people, Chen Luo's smile became more obvious. What? Are you surrounded? Hearing this, Wanda and Pietro looked at each other with hesitation in their eyes. Mr. Chen Luo. After a moment, Wanda's eyes narrowed, and she summoned the courage to ask, I want to know, chap, why you didn't consider letting us transform before? Chen Luo had already told the two of them unreservedly about the situation of the Blood Clan just now. To their surprise, this Blood Clan was very different from what they usually knew in the movies. Not afraid of sunlight, garlic, silver, it can be said that everything they know about vampires will not cause any harm to the Blood Clan. And as members of the Blood Clan, not only are they huge in strength compared to ordinary people, the amount of difference is far greater in terms of lifespan. A vampire's lifespan of thousands of years, in their understanding, is no different from that of a god. If there is any shortcoming, it is that the Blood Clan needs to replenish blood regularly. Although sucking blood is a bit unacceptable to them, it is nothing compared to the power it finally gained. What's even more surprising to Wanda is that Chen Luo's identity as the founder of the Blood Clan means that only his blood can allow them to successfully complete the transformation and become a member of the Blood Clan. After learning this, they couldn't help but have the same doubts as Tony. Since there was such a direct method, why did Chen Luo choose to go far away? They thought about this for a while, but they couldn't come up with an answer. You are right. Transforming you into Blood Clan is indeed the fastest and most effective way. Speaking of this, Chen Luo sighed softly, and then said, For ordinary people, becoming a Blood Clan will definitely only have advantages and no disadvantages for them. But for you siblings, I'm not sure about this. Turning his head, Chen Luo looked at Wanda in front of him seriously and said in a deep voice, Wanda, Pietro, I believe that you have greater potential. As long as you can successfully guide it, your future will be bright. It's much better than becoming the Blood Clan. Chen Luo also meant what he said sincerely. After all, he knew very well about Wanda's future abilities. Needless to say, Origin Magic Power definitely has the potential to become a god in the future, and the super speed owned by Pietro, although it may seem a bit inconspicuous, if it is developed well, it also has huge amounts of potential in the future. Just like the Flash in the universe next door, as long as the speed is fast enough, even the timeline can be reset. Such a power may not even be possible by gods. Although I don't know if Pietro has the chance to develop to this point. As long as he develops normally, he will be at least an extraordinary level strongman in the future. If he can further tap his potential, like Aurora and the others, it will be great. There is a chance to break through to the potential seed of a demigod. Even though their ability has not been activated yet, Chen Luo understands very well that Wanda and the others are definitely mutants with great potential. If their awakening is not activated before, just convert them into the Blood Clan. Who can guarantee that nothing will change later? If the two lose the opportunity of ability awakening because of this, it will definitely be a huge amount of loss for Chen Luo. So after taking this into consideration, Chen Luo already had an idea in his mind about the future arrangements for the two of them. Chapter 489, Part 1. Chen Luo has already thought clearly about the future arrangements for the two of them. In order to make the two mutants awakening, Chen Luo knew that it might not be possible with his ability. But although there is no way on his side, it does not mean that there is no possibility elsewhere. At the very least, Chen Luo knows that there is a place that possesses such technology. Garden of Eden. After the Battle of Apocalypse, after witnessing Magneto's power, in order to prevent the other party from going berserk, the professor and his team took the initiative to come to the door. After a period of discussion, the joint meeting unanimously approved a proposal. That is to allow mutants to form a separate kingdom. The Garden of Eden is the name of this country. As the king of the Garden of Eden, Magneto is not allowed to step outside the territory unless the Union Council unanimously agrees. If he violates this agreement, it will be regarded as the Garden of Eden officially declaring war on the Union Council. Regarding the conditions of the Parliament, Magneto Eric did not choose to refuse in the end, but nodded and agreed. In the following 10 years, Eric did not take a step outside the territory. He stayed in the base all day and continued to struggle to realize his ideals. Although during the Apocalypse battle, humans all over the world saw the Professor and these mutants standing with them, coupled with the shock of him, a mutant who almost destroyed the world, the situation of mutant improved a lot. But this is still not what he wants to see. With his wisdom, he can naturally see that even though the living environment of mutants has improved a lot now, the discrimination of humans against the mutants is still deeply rooted in their consciousness. And this kind of discrimination is not that it can be solved easily. In order to realize his ideal and let all mutants live freely in this world, Eric already had an idea in his mind when the Garden of Eden was established. If there is no longer a barrier between the two groups of humans and mutants, in Eric's opinion, there is only one way. That means turning all humans into mutants. If he can create a machine that can induce gene mutations in humans and successfully activate the X gene in the body, then these humans can become a new mutant and join their group, as long as those humans become one of them. What reason do they have to look down on their own kind? Finally, when all humans on the Earth are transformed into mutants, then in the future of this planet, the era of mutants will truly come. Therefore, in order to realize his ideal, Eric has been staying in the underground base for several years and devoted himself to research for more than 10 years. Until some time ago, after Chen Luo was successfully resurrected and went to the Garden of Eden for the first time to visit his old friend, Eric finally got results. Mutant Transformation Instrument. Using Eric's ability, the instrument releases light that can induce human gene mutations. As this light envelopes the body, the X gene in the body will be successfully activated and then transformed into a mutant in less than a day. But what makes Eric very disappointed is that this transformation has irreversible damage. Just like when he wanted to test whether his new invention was useful, Eric specially caught a human being for the experiment. After being exposed to the light, although the result was exactly as he thought, the other person did become a mutant, but it only lasted for a long time. After several hours, the body finally couldn't bear the changes brought about in a short period of time and collapsed instantly. After this experiment, Eric also discovered the flaw of this instrument. Although it can really mutate human genes, this change is too drastic and overbearing. The human body simply cannot bear it. Even if it succeeds in the end, it will only be for a short period of time and cannot be sustained for a long time. Eric had great expectations for this instrument, but after seeing the final results, Eric was also hit by huge amounts of. Coupled with Chen Luo's final persuasion, he also gave up in frustration. As for the mutant converter, he also sealed it up. And Chen Luo's goal this time was precisely this instrument that they regarded as a failure. In his opinion, although for ordinary humans, this instrument will not only not allow them to become Superman with special abilities, but will also greatly shorten their lifespan and lead to death early. But this is all for ordinary humans. For potential mutants like Wanda Pietro, the rays emitted by this instrument will be the key to triggering the final evolution. After all, according to Chen Luo's understanding, with just a suitable stimulus, Wanda are likely to be able to awaken their own abilities and become mutants with unlimited potential. Asterisk. The instrument developed by Eric is undoubtedly their best driving force. The light emitted by this instrument can induce the successful activation of the X gene in the human body, thereby allowing the human body to evolve. The X gene in Wanda's body needs an appropriate stimulus to be activated at this moment. Different from the completely silent X gene fragments in ordinary humans, the former potential mutant is likely to awaken even without the need for instruments. After being exposed to the instrument, their bodies will not bear too much pressure, so there is no need to worry that their bodies may collapse at any time. According to previous memories, Wanda's ability awakening took place in Hydra's base, and the reason why they were able to do this was with the help of the power of the Mind Gem. But Chen Luo has no idea how to use the power of the Mind Gem to help the two of them awakening ability, so the best choice at the moment is to use the instrument in the Garden of Eden. However, because the instrument has been sealed by Eric, whether it is still there or not is still a question. Regarding this, Chen Luo has to go and confirm it in person. And this is a reason why he just said he would have to wait for a while. However, Chen Luo is still quite confident about this. Even if the instrument has been discarded, as long as Eric, the inventor, is still there, it is not a problem to make another one. As for whether the other party is willing or not, Chen Luo believes that if he knew the true identities of Wanda and Wanda, he would take the initiative without saying anything else. After bidding farewell to Wanda, Chen Luo said hello under the somewhat reluctant gaze of the other party and turned to leave without any further pause. A few days later, after briefly handling the matters here, Chen Luo set off again, planning to go to the Garden of Eden to inquire about the mutant transformation instrument. With a thought, the next moment, Chen Luo appeared on the island where Eric was. Being familiar with the road, Chen Luo walked through the steel buildings in front of him and arrived at Eric's base. The moment he arrived at the gate opened instantly and Chen Luo was welcomed in. Taking the elevator all the way down, soon, when the elevator door opened, a familiar voice sounded in front of me. Chapter 490, Part 1. Chen, long time no see. Looking at the figure waiting outside the elevator door, Chen Luo had a smile on his face. Stepping out of the elevator door, Chen Luo looked at the other person up and down. After a while, Chen Luo nodded. Eric, your condition looks much better than last time. It seems that you really listened to what I said before. Hearing this, Eric's eyes flashed with bitterness. He nodded slightly and replied, Chen, you are right. It is indeed not a feasible way to transform all humans into mutants through that method. I've already talked with Charles about this, and he has the same view as you. One thing Eric did not tell Chen Luo was that after Chen Luo left, Eric, who was unwilling to give up, once approached Han, 240 Ku, the first scientist of mutant, and wanted him to help improve the instrument, thereby truly realizing the rapid evolution of humans to mutants. Regarding Eric's request, Hank, who was also very interested in the instrument he invented, did not refuse immediately. Instead, he asked for all the information about the instrument for analysis and research. However, after studying for a period of time, although he was a little surprised by Eric's unique idea, after his research and calculations, Hank still had no choice but to find that this instrument could not realize the other party's idea of completely transforming humans into mutants. The reason is the same as what Chen Luo discovered before. Faced with such drastic changes after being exposed to light, the human body cannot fully withstand it. It will only take a day or so, at most, before the body will collapse and die instantly. After getting Hank's judgment, Eric finally gave up and completely lost the idea of continuing his research. With his rationality returning, Eric, who was no longer as busy as before, also got sufficient rest time. Therefore, during this period of recuperation, his physical condition is also much better than Chen Luo's previous time. Seeing Eric, who seemed to have regained his energy, Chen Luo immediately expressed his intention to come after a few brief greetings, as the two of them were old friends. Eric, do you still have that instrument of yours? Huh? Eric was stunned and looked at him with some confusion. I'm still here. But Chen, why do you ask this? Is it possible that you still need to use it? You should understand the shortcomings of that instrument, right? Definitely. Chen Luo nodded and then changed the subject. But this time the situation is a little different. I met two very interesting young people. If they were to be irradiated by that instrument, I think they should no problem. Speaking of this, Chen Luo couldn't help but cast his eyes towards Eric, his eyes full of meaning. But the look in his eyes was fleeting, and Eric didn't notice anything unusual. After listening to Chen Luo's explanation, he nodded happily and said, Since you want to use it, I won't stop you. The instrument is in its original place. Whenever you want to use it, Before he finished speaking, he seemed to have thought of something, and a trace of hesitation flashed across his face. This was definitely not because he had any sympathy for the two young people Chen Luo mentioned that he had never met. It was just that while he was preparing to agree to Chen Luo, he suddenly thought that in order to activate this instrument, he needed his ability as a support. After conducting corresponding experiments before, Eric discovered that every time he used the instrument, it would cause extremely serious damage to his body. Not only would it take a long time to recover after use, but it would also have a detrimental effect on his lifespan. It also had a certain impact. Thinking of such consequences, a trace of hesitation suddenly flashed in his eyes. Chen Luo can definitely understand Eric's hesitation, but he has already had a corresponding solution to this problem. Eric, I said, have you forgotten something? As he spoke, Chen Luo flipped his palm, and the blood cup instantly emerged from his hand. With this thing here, you don't need to take care of that instrument yourself. Just leave it to me. Seeing the blood cup in Chen Luo's hand, Eric's eyes lit up, and he immediately reacted. When he and Chen Luo acted together to destroy the Hellfire Club headquarters, he experienced firsthand the power of this artifact. He only needed to provide a drop of someone else's blood to possess someone else's ability in a short time. Thinking back to this, he also instantly understood Chen Luo's thoughts. He only needs to provide a little blood, and then Chen Luo will activate the instrument. With Chen Luo's ability and his lifespan that has skyrocketed after reaching the demigod level, for this small loss, it's just a drop in the bucket causing impact. After understanding this, Eric immediately stopped hesitating, nodded immediately, and agreed directly. I understand. With this thing here, I don't need to worry about anything anymore. But that instrument hasn't been used for a while. Give me some time to check and repair it, and then you can use it. Thanks a lot, Eric. The two quickly reached an agreement, and then Chen Luo stayed here for another day, catching up with old friends like Eric Raven, before finally setting off to return. Time passed very quickly, and in a blink of an eye, it was already a week later. This day was also the day agreed upon by Chen Luo and Eric. In the afternoon, Chen Luo came to the wooden house where Wanda and her brother lived again and knocked on the door. The two people who had already received the news were also prepared early, but there was still a trace of nervousness on his face. Seeing this, Chen Luo stopped, smiled, and comforted. Wanda, Pietro, don't be nervous. There is no danger over there. You will be back soon. Chen Luo's words obviously had an effect on the two of them. Maybe it was because they trusted Chen Luo as their savior. After a while, the two became quiet again. Chen Luo nodded lightly to the two of them. Chen Luo did not have any hesitation this time. He came to the two of them, put his hands on their shoulders, and disappeared in an instant with a thought. The next moment, when the three of them appeared again, they had arrived at the gate of the base that Eric knew. Just like before, the three of them successfully walked through the gate, took the elevator, and went all the way down to the depths of the ground. As the elevator door opened again, Eric and Raven, who had been waiting for a long time, walked over. Chen, you are finally here. Seeing Chen Luo, a bright smile appeared on Raven's face. After saying this, she subconsciously turned her eyes behind Chen Luo. It was obvious that she was also curious about the two young people Chen Luo brought this time. However, when she actually saw Wanda, the smile on Raven's face gradually softened and her expression changed slightly. Chapter 491, Part 1. They are. Looking at Wanda and two people behind Chen Luo, Raven was silent for a moment, turned to look in the direction of Chen Luo, and said in confusion. They were the ones I was in during that war some time ago. Chen Luo did not hide this, and now Jian Kure introduced the origins of the two people. After listening to Chen Luo's explanation, Raven's eyes flashed, and she came to the slightly nervous Wanda with a gentle smile on her face. With Raven's emotional intelligence, it didn't take long. Soon, with her comfort, the tension on their faces gradually disappeared, and they unconsciously gained a little more trust in Raven. After chatting with Wanda for a while, Raven finally asked the question she really wanted to ask after it was almost time. By the way, Wanda, I heard from Chen that you grew up in a small town. How was life there? Regarding Raven's question, Wanda did not have any doubts and began to answer in a low voice. After Raven's quiet questioning, she finally had a rough understanding of Wanda's situation. Both of them grew up in a small country called Sokovia. They were raised by their mothers since childhood. Because they had to raise two children, their mothers were busy from morning to night every day, taking on many roles. She holds several jobs so that the salary she earns is enough for their family to live. Although their living conditions were somewhat difficult and constrained, with the mother's hard work and maintenance, Wanda and the others were able to grow up carefree until the war came. In that war, they lost their home where they had lived for more than 10 years. More importantly, the person who had raised them since childhood and their only relative also lost their home in that war. It is precisely because of losing their mother that Wanda are driven by hatred and desperately want to find the power to take revenge. Even if they are used as Hydra's experimental subjects, they have no hesitation. It wasn't until the two of them were accidentally discovered by Chen Luo some time ago that their original destiny finally changed. After hearing what happened to the two of them, Raven's heart moved slightly, and she subconsciously looked behind her in the direction of Eric, frowning slightly as she didn't know what she was thinking of writing. The reason why she suddenly had a sudden impulse to ask Wanda about the situation of the two of them was also very simple. Because just when she saw the two of them for the first time, a familiar figure instantly appeared in Raven's mind. Eric, to be precise, should be Eric when he was young. Whether it was Wanda or Pietro, the two of them looked somewhat similar to Eric when he was young. It was precisely because of this discovery that she suddenly felt something in her heart. I had the idea of getting to know the Wangda siblings. During subsequent inquiries and understanding, although she sympathized with the two siblings' experiences, Raven was a little surprised that in their lives from childhood to adulthood, there were only traces of their mother, but there was no trace of their father. It has never appeared. After learning this, Raven felt a little more hopeful. Beside her, Chen Luo also saw Raven's reaction. His eyes flashed with light, and he was secretly amazed at Raven's keen reaction. Although he understood that Raven might be far behind, Chen Luo had no intention of stopping him. He raised the corners of his mouth slightly and stood there waiting. Wanda, he didn't let him wait long, and then Raven, who couldn't hold himself back, spoke again. Do you know anything about your father? Father. Wanda were stunned for a moment and looked at each other subconsciously. After a moment of silence, they both shook their heads. This mother hasn't told us much, so we don't know much about her. That you? Just when Raven was about to ask further questions, the next moment, Eric's voice sounded. Raven. Eric frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, You have too many questions, and the laboratory is already ready. If you have any more questions, just wait until they come out. Raven's voice paused. Then she reacted, and a somewhat apologetic smile appeared on her face. I'm so sorry, it seems I have too many questions. While apologizing to the two of them, Raven couldn't help but feel a pity in her heart. Although I haven't learned the news I really want to know in this situation, it is obviously not suitable to continue to ask more questions. After all, they have just met now, and there will be a lot of time in the future to wait for the relationship between Wanda and the others. After the relationship has progressed further, it will not be too late to understand each other. After understanding this, Raven stopped worrying and regained her composure. Seeing this, Eric nodded slightly, greeted Chen Luo, then turned around and led Chen Luo and his group towards the laboratory. It is said to be a laboratory, but in fact, it is still the cave that Chen Luo saw when he came here. The only difference from before is that now behind this cave, because it has not been taken care of for a long time, except for the instrument in front, which was repaired by Eric because Chen Luo needed it, the surrounding rocks are also repaired. The walls are covered with a thick layer of moss. A rich green color spreads among them, and the cave is filled with a damp atmosphere, making people feel a little uncomfortable. In response, Chen Luo smiled faintly and ducked into the cave. With the ability of energy conversion, the surrounding energy quickly transformed into substantial flames, quickly covering the surrounding rock walls. Under the high temperature of the flame, the moss on the rock wall was quickly cleaned up, and the originally humid air in the cave suddenly became dry, and the uncomfortable smell dissipated instantly, making it look much fresher. After doing all this, Chen Luo kept moving and strode to the 390 instrument in front. He looked at Wanda and the two who were still lingering at the entrance of the cave, smiled and said, Wanda, Pietro, come in, it's about to start. As for what Chen Luo was going to do next, the two of them were also informed by Chen Luo a few days ago, so they didn't do much hesitation. They hurriedly came to the cave and looked at Chen Luo with anticipation flashing in his eyes. Eric, I see. Seeing this, Eric nodded and waved his hand. The wooden door slowly began to close. Eric, at this moment, not far from Chen Luo, Pietro blinked and whispered with some confusion. Why does this name sound familiar? Wanda, do you remember it? Wanda thought about it for a moment, frowned slightly, and said softly, I remember my mother mentioned to us when we were young, that person seemed to have this name. Because the conversation between the two was too quiet, except for Chen Luo, Eric outside the cave did not hear clearly. As the two metal doors slowly closed, Eric's figures gradually disappeared. Regarding the conversation between Wanda and Wanda just now, Chen Luo did not express any opinions. He nodded to the two of them, put his hands on the instrument console, and said in a deep voice, Are you ready? It's about to start. After hearing this, the two people's expressions froze. They said nothing more and nodded silently. Seeing that both of them were ready, Chen Luo immediately started taking action without saying a word. Chapter 492, Part 1. As soon as he stepped inside the instrument, Chen Luo had already swallowed the transformed blood in the blood cup. Then, a strange feeling instantly emerged from his body. With a thought, almost subconsciously, under Chen Luo's mental intensity that reached the demigod level, he clearly perceived that the ubiquitous magnetic field spread all around, affecting everything including himself and all surrounding objects. All wrapped up, and Chen Luo was able to discover that there was more to what he could do. As his consciousness spread, Chen Luo somehow suddenly had a hunch in his heart that as long as he was willing, all magnetic fields within the scope of his consciousness could be mobilized by him. As his consciousness extends outward, he can even use the magnetic field to simulate the appearance and even the conversation content of the mutants living on the island above the base, as if there are countless more pairs of eyes outside his body. It's magical. After carefully experiencing Eric's ability for a while, and finally becoming familiar with it, Chen Luo quickly calmed down. With a thought, as ability poured into the instrument below, a strong attraction emerged from it in the next moment. Feeling that the ability he got from Eric was pouring into the instrument rapidly, Chen Luo not only did not stop it, but also sped up his movements. Under his initiative, the ability poured in even faster, and then under the influence of ability under the influx, the console under Chen Luo's hands lit up at a speed visible to the naked eye. The arc-shaped metal pipe behind him slowly began to rotate around Chen Luo, from slow to fast. In just a few seconds, accompanied by whistling sounds, the metal pipe turned into a ball. The afterimage enveloped Chen Luo. As the instrument was finally activated, the next moment, under the surprised gazes of Wanda and the others, A white light in the shape of a water wave was generated from the instrument, centered on the instrument, and quickly spread to the surroundings. Seeing this white light approaching quickly, the two people's pupils shrank instantly, their bodies tensed, and they subconsciously wanted to avoid it. But before they had time to make any move, the next moment, they seemed to have thought of something. Their expressions instantly became firm. They clenched their fists, closed their eyes, and white light still passed over them. As this white light completely enveloped the two people, finally, under the illumination of this light, the long-hidden X gene in the two people's bodies was gradually activated, and the power that should have belonged to them finally began to awaken. But all this cannot be accomplished immediately. Even if Wanda and ordinary humans are different, it is much more difficult to awaken into mutants than others, but this still requires an adaptation process. And considering their ability powerful, perhaps this process will continue for quite some time. So when the white light gradually dissipated, Chen Luo was not surprised when he saw Wanda, who had not undergone any significant changes. However, what surprised him was that after he activated the device this time, his ability from Eric was consumed and absorbed by it at a rapid speed. When the device was turned off, the ability was completely absorbed. After feeling the exaggerated consumption speed of this instrument, Chen Luo also had a clear understanding of why Eric had to find a little naughty boy to start it on his behalf after developing this machine in the world he knew. Such a terrifying consumption is not something an old man can bear. Even though Eric is in much better condition now compared to the last time we met, his age is there, and his energy is definitely far less than when he was in his prime. In this state, if he had really ignored it and wanted to start his human transformation plan, he would have been swallowed up by this instrument in less than a minute, and even if he lost his life as a result, there would be no accident. These thoughts flashed through Chen Luo's mind. When he came back to his senses, Chen Luo stepped down from the instrument, came to the two of them, and asked, "How do you feel?" Hearing Chen Luo's voice, Wanda's eyelids trembled, and she slowly opened her eyes. He lowered his head and looked at his hands, remained silent for a moment, and then slowly shook his head. "I feel like there are some changes in my body, but I can't really tell." Chen Luo understood and nodded, not surprised by this. "In this case, then for the next period of time, you should have a good rest at home. When you feel any obvious changes in your body, please contact me again." Hearing this, Wanda bit her lip gently and did not answer, looking like hesitation. Seeing the other party's reaction, Chen Luo raised his eyebrows slightly. "What, is there any problem?" Wanda came back to her senses and quickly shook her head, indicating that she had no objection. Upon seeing this, Chen Luo felt that the other party's reaction was a bit strange, but he didn't think much about it and led the two of them towards the door. Wanda followed closely behind Chen Luo, with her head lowered. She glanced at Chen Luo's back from the corner of her eye from time to time, and she didn't know what she thought of. A blush flashed across her face, but it quickly disappeared. Beside Wanda, Pietro saw all the reactions of his sister. While feeling relieved, the color of his eyes quietly changed when he looked at Chen Luo. But Chen Luo doesn't know all of this. Outside the gate, there was a sudden fluctuation in the air, and then Chen Luo and three others appeared in an instant and came to Eric and Eric. Seeing Chen Luo come out, Eric's eyes flashed with realization, and he smiled and said, "It seems that you are over. How is it? Is it going well?" Chen Luo shrugged, looked at the two people behind him, and said with a relaxed expression, "If you want to see the results, you need to wait for a while." "Yeah, but I think there should be no problem." "Oh, so confident." A trace of surprise flashed across Eric's face, and he subconsciously looked at Wanda and the two. However, when his eyes fell on Wanda and the two of them, for some reason, his heart skipped a beat. Looking at the two of them, he felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. After thinking carefully for a while and confirming that he had never met Wanda and the others before, Eric shook his head and thought no more. But maybe this unfamiliar feeling of familiarity affected him. Just as the greetings with Chen Luo were over and the three of them were about to leave, Eric suddenly spoke. "List, what's the matter? Can you tell me when the results of these two children are obtained?" Chen Luo paused, raised the corners of his mouth slightly, and nodded lightly. "No problem." Chapter 493, Part 1. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, another month passed. Early this morning, on the edge of the town near Xavier's school, there was a wide lake located in it. The sun had just risen from the east, and through the thin clouds in the sky, it shed wisps of light, reflecting on the lake, exuding a warm and genial light. The cool breeze blows, the lake surface is sparkling, and a few fish jump on the lake surface from time to time, splashing a little bit of water, which adds a different kind of scenery to the lake. Looks extremely pleasant. Next to the lake, a large wooden house stood quietly, as if it was asleep, without any sound. Until the next moment, accompanied by a burst of engine roar, the sound came from far to near, quickly approaching the direction of the wooden house. Looking from a distance, it turned out to be a Camaro sports car that was intertwined with yellow and black, with a streamlined body, and looked extremely cool. Smoke and dust were rising from behind the body, and it was approaching here quickly. Finally, when the vehicle arrived near the wooden house, it braked suddenly, drew a long arc in front of it, and finally stopped slowly. The car door opened, and a man and a woman got out of the car. Looking at the wooden house in front of them, Gwen couldn't help but a hint of joy flashed across her face. He quickly came to the door of the wooden house and knocked gently, and Gwen's voice sounded excited. "Wanda, are you awake? We are leaving." At this time, Peter also came to the side, looked at the time, and said helplessly, "Gwen, it's still an hour before the agreed time. Why did you come so early?" Hearing this, the smile on Gwen's face disappeared. She rolled her eyes at him and snorted. "What do you know? Don't you know that we still need time to put on makeup before we go out? Do you think everyone is like you boys? Just wash your face and go out." "Well..." Peter scratched his head in embarrassment and was speechless. "Gwen." At this time, a surprised voice sounded in the house. Immediately afterwards, with a clattering sound coming downstairs, the door opened and Wanda's beautiful face appeared in front of the two of them. "Why did you come so early?" Quickly bringing the two people into the house, Wanda asked in surprise. Gwen didn't speak. She looked at Wanda up and down for a long time. A trace of envy flashed in her eyes, CHBG, and she exclaimed, "Wanda, what have you done during this time? I feel like your skin is getting better and better." "Got it." Speaking of this, Gwen couldn't help but reached out and touched Wanda's cheek, feeling the delicate and smooth touch in her palm, and her face showed no trace of envy. "Wanda, do you have any skincare secrets? Can you tell me? I want to have such good skin like you." Being directly touched by Gwen, Wanda's face instantly turned red. She subconsciously took a few steps back and avoided her best friend's salty hand touching her face. Whispered, "I'm not very sure about this. Maybe it's because you rest a lot during this period, right?" Wanda said a little uncertainly. Speaking of physical changes, there were signs after he and Pietro came back from the Garden of Eden, but it was not obvious at the beginning, and because they didn't have many friends here at that time. From Chen Luo, after learning about Wanda's situation, Peter and Gwen even expressed their willingness to have more contact with each other. It happened that due to the impact of the war, their school had already closed early, which gave them enough time to get along with Wanda. In addition, Harry came here to play with Peter from time to time. Maybe it was because of their different personalities. Because of the friendly nature, in just 1 month, a very deep friendship was established with Wanda and the others. When they first met, the changes in her body were not obvious. Although Wanda was still very beautiful at that time, she had huge amounts of changes compared to now. Maybe it's because she got enough rest, or maybe it's the changes caused by the gradual awakening of the X gene in her body. Wanda only feels that her body is getting stronger day by day, and even her skin is much better than before. If you have become a little pale because you have been underground for a long time, you will become much healthier now. Her skin is white, tender, and translucent, with a faint rosy luster. It looks like a piece of warm jade. Her skin is so delicate that even the pores are difficult to see clearly. With such a natural skin base, Wanda becomes even more beautiful and charming. Even though there is no trace of makeup on her face, few people can compare with her current appearance. At least among all the people Gwen has seen before, Wanda is already the most beautiful existence she has ever seen. Looking at Wanda's current appearance, Gwen couldn't help but sigh and sighed softly. "Wanda, you are becoming more and more beautiful. I don't know who else can be your boyfriend in the future." Hearing this, Wanda's face turned slightly red. She lowered her head without saying a word, and a figure quietly appeared in her mind. Da-da! While the three of them were talking, the next moment, there was another rush of people coming downstairs. Looking up following the sound, I saw Pietro holding a chicken coop on his head, with 2 dark circles under his eyes. He was yawning, wearing a coat, and walked quickly in front of the three of them. "Peter, Gwen, are we leaving?" Seeing Pietro's state, Peter was stunned and said helplessly, "Pietro, you're not playing games all night again, are you? Have you forgotten that we are going out for an outing today? Do you still have the energy to go out now?" Pietro finally finished dressing, stretched out, and said with a relaxed look, "Don't worry, I've made plans. Isn't it still more than an hour's drive from the final destination? Then I will take advantage of this time to have a good sleep in the car, so that I can recover when I get there." After telling him his plan, Pietro yawned while pushing the door open and stepping forward. "Then let's set off. It's not too early now, isn't it?" The three of them looked at each other and shook their heads helplessly. "Pietro, it's not time yet. There's still an hour before departure." As soon as he finished speaking, Pietro paused, quickly turned back, and ran towards the bedroom upstairs. "It seems it's still early. I'll sleep for another hour and call the city when the time comes." After saying that, with a muffled sound, the door upstairs was instantly closed, and Pietro's figure disappeared instantly. Looking at the closed door upstairs, the three of them immediately looked at each other in silence, and the room fell into silence for a while. Chapter 494, Part 1. Finally, an hour later, Wanda walked out of the kitchen quickly with 2 large bamboo baskets in her hands. I'm ready and can go now. Looking at the 2 bamboo baskets Wanda was holding in her hand, Gwen blinked and looked at each other in confusion. Wanda, have you prepared too many things? There are only a few of us going on an outing now, so we can't use so many things, right? Peter on the side also nodded repeatedly. Yes, and we and Harry have prepared a lot of food. The food is enough for us to consume. If there is more, we can't finish it. This outing was also proposed by Gwen. Now that spring is approaching, there happens to be a hill not far from this town that is suitable as an outing location. After some discussion, they finally decided to go there together. A small mountain for a 3-day camping trip. And today is the day they officially set off. After listening to the 2 people's persuasion, Wanda still had a smile on her face and said softly, I accidentally made more, so let's bring them all. After all, we are going out for a few days this time, and we won't be able to eat, and it will cost money. Although that is said, the real reason why Wanda did this was because he and Pietro were affected by the experience of wandering around after their home was destroyed. During that time, they understood the importance of food better than anyone else. Although this outing seemed safer, in order to prevent accidents, Wanda deliberately made food rations for a few more days. If something went wrong, it would also alleviate the food shortage problem. Definitely, she didn't intend to explain these considerations to Gwen and the others. After all, the possibility of an accident happening this time was too small. The reason why she made these preparations was just due to her past habits. Even if she explained to them, it would be nothing more. It only adds to the worries. After hearing what Wanda had said, the 2 looked at each other, nodded helplessly, and had no choice but to agree. Then Wanda went upstairs to wake up Pietro, and the 4 of them took the food prepared by Wanda and sat down in the bumblebee carriage. Peter sat on the driver's seat and started the vehicle with ease. As the engine roared, the next moment, the vehicle gradually moved forward. In order to prevent others from seeing the strangeness of Bumblebee, at the request of Chen Luo, Peter also spent a few days learning to drive. After a period of field practice, he can now be regarded as an experienced driver. Very stable. From the passenger seat, Pietro looked out the window at the road, especially the cycling teams that were racing alongside them, and couldn't help but say with some depression on his face, Peter, can you drive faster? This is too slow. Look, those people on bicycles are almost overtaking us now. Peter put his hands on the steering wheel, looked forward without blinking, and said without looking back, Chen taught me that when driving, safety first, speed second. Don't compete with others blindly. Otherwise, if there is an accident later, we will be the ones injured, right? Before he could finish speaking, the other 3 people behind him all said. Pietro rolled his eyes and lay weakly on the side window, looking at the bicycle team in front of him that was gradually overtaking them, his eyes filled with despair. Right. At this moment, he seemed to suddenly think of something. He turned his eyes, looked behind him from the corner of his eye, and raised the corners of his mouth slightly. Peter, you can't be so open-minded. No girl will like you if you are too mature. Huh. Peter was stunned for a moment, his expression slightly unnatural. There's drama. Seeing Peter's reaction, Pietro was overjoyed and quickly kept up his efforts. Peter, you see, even for safety reasons, there are not many cars on this road now, right? He pointed to the front. Sure enough, it was as he said. It was just getting light now. There were not many pedestrians in the town. There were very few vehicles on the road they were walking on. Only the team was organized to exercise every day. The bicycle team looks more eye-catching, but with their size, it is obviously impossible to occupy the entire road. Pietro looked at him thoughtfully and said seriously, no matter how fast you drive on this road, there won't be any problems. Peter, don't you want to experience the feeling of drag racing? Maybe if you do this, you'll be more popular with girls? Peter's heart moved, and he subconsciously looked through the rearview mirror toward the back seat of the car. When he saw Gwen's somewhat moved expression, Peter's eyes narrowed, and he made up his mind instantly. The next moment, the 2 sports cars where the 4 of them were sitting seemed to feel the mood of their partners. A burst of exciting music suddenly sounded from the car speakers, and the roar of the engine gradually became louder, like a beast that was ready to attack at any time. Action. Everyone sit still. Peter's face changed, his blood surged, and a flash of excitement suddenly flashed in his eyes. He shouted, then stepped on the accelerator without any hesitation and moved forward at full speed. Please give me flowers. Boom! The sound of the engine running suddenly amplified several times, like the roar of a beast. From behind the car, a violent white exhaust gas spurted out, and the speed of the car instantly accelerated, like a wild horse running wildly forward. A strong push on the back instantly acted on the 4 people, and strong airflow continued to pour in from the car window, almost subconsciously. In the back seat of the car, Gwen and Wanda couldn't help but let out a scream, while Peter and the 2 in the front couldn't help but scream. The reaction of the people was surprisingly unanimous. Their faces turned red. They looked ahead with excitement. They shouted, and their adrenaline soared. "That's it, Peter, speed up! Speed up!" Pietro looked at the gradually blurry scenery outside the window. The bicycle team, that was tens of meters ahead of them, was also surpassed by them in an instant. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared. The road ahead seemed to become a simple road. With straight lines, time seems to slow down all around, and this unique touch makes Pietro even more addicted. 0. The body began to tremble slightly. As the speed continued to increase, the frequency of Pietro's body trembled at this moment continued to increase, as if he was suffering from epilepsy. The genes in his body that had been dormant for a long time also began to revive at a speed visible to the naked eye. An inexplicable force surged out and began to rapidly transform his body. But Pietro himself still doesn't know all this. However, before Pietro could continue to immerse himself in it, an exclamation suddenly came from behind. "Peter, slow down, don't drive so fast." Hearing Gwen's voice, Peter came to his senses instantly and quickly stepped on the brakes to slow down. As he moved, the speed on the instrument panel that had soared to 200 kilometers per hour was also dropping at a speed visible to the naked eye, and finally gradually returned to normal. "Gwen, are you okay?" Peter's worried voice sounded. "It's okay for now." As the vehicle slowed down, Gwen in the back finally breathed a sigh of relief. They glanced at Peter angrily, and Gwen said, "But don't drive so fast in the future. Drag racing is not every girl likes it, you know." Peter was stunned for a moment, then quickly realized what he was doing and nodded to express his understanding. However, what they didn't notice was that as the vehicle slowed down, the abnormal movements in Pietro's body gradually began to subside, and his body quickly returned to normal and stopped shaking, as if nothing happened just now. Chapter 495, Part 1. A few more hours passed. As Peter drove the vehicle, he gradually moved away from the town behind him and finally stopped slowly in front of a hill 3 or 400 miles away from the town. "Here we are." Looking at the hill in front of him, which was only a few hundred meters away, Gwen's eyes lit up and he spoke. "It's Mr. Chen Luo." As soon as Gwen finished speaking, Wanda on the side seemed to have discovered something and looked forward with a surprised look on her face. Following Wanda's gaze, she saw less than 100 meters in front of the four of them. At the end of the path, on either side of the door of a completely black Dodge Challenger, were two figures standing on either side. They were also going to participate in this outing. To be precise, they were Chen Luo and Harry, who were camping. Looking at the Chevrolet approaching them in front of them, Harry, who had been waiting for a long time, immediately rushed forward with a look of surprise on his face. 663. "Peter, you are finally here." Quickly arriving at the car door, Harry said with a smile on his face, "We have been waiting here for a long time. Now that everyone has arrived, let's go." The car door opened, and Peter and the four of them got out of the car one after another until Wanda got out of the car. Seeing Wanda, who had changed significantly from the last time they met, Harry's eyes flashed with surprise, and he couldn't help but exclaimed, "Wanda, you seem to have become more beautiful." "Thank you." Wanda lowered her head slightly, looking past Harry from the corner of her eye to the figure in the distance. A hint of scenery appeared on her face. After reuniting with Peter and the others, Harry seemed to have thought of something and sighed softly as he looked at his friends. It's a pity that Jane has a part-time job this time and can't come over. Otherwise, this camping trip could be more lively. Despite the amazing changes in Wanda, Harry is still focused on the Mary Jane who grew up with him and Peter, and with his active pursuit, there is only one last step left between them. Success comes together. When he decided to go camping with Peter and the others, Harry had an idea in mind. He wanted to take this opportunity to really catch Jane. Even for this plan, he specifically asked Chen Luo for advice and came up with a few ideas. Not a bad plan. However, fate is not as good as fate. Just one day before their departure, Jane suddenly found her dream part-time job in the theater, where she could get one step closer to her dream. This was an extremely rare opportunity for her. So although she was a little regretful that she couldn't attend the camping trip with Harry and the others this time, she still didn't want to miss this opportunity. The same goes for Harry. Although he was very sorry that the plan had failed before it was implemented, he could also understand Jane's choice. In the end, after bidding farewell to the other party, he could only rush here alone with Chen Luo. As for Harry's plan, Peter and others who were participants were naturally aware of it. Looking at Harry's helpless expression, several people looked at each other, obviously feeling a little sorry that Harry's plan failed. Then, with the comfort of everyone, Harry's face finally looked much better. He regained his senses and cheered up again. Harry quickly greeted, "By the way, while it's still early, let's go up the mountain early. It will be almost noon when we get up there, just in time for lunch." Others had no objections to this, so they nodded and started to take action. Opening the trunk of the car, he took out the food that had been prepared. On the other side, Chen Luo also called Harry, Pietro, and the others to come over. He took out the food prepared in the car and the simple tent for the night, and held it in his arms with some difficulty. Everyone, looking at the people gathered, Chen Luo pointed to the hill behind him. The hill was shrouded in a thick layer of green and surrounded by forests. There was a small stream flowing at the foot of the hill, and birds were flying over in the sky. Get up alive! Not far behind everyone, there was a winding trail that went straight into the depths of the forest. However, this trail could only be used by one person at most, so it was obviously impossible to drive up the mountain. Definitely, this rule is not suitable for Bumblebee, who is a shape-shifting King Kong, but as for his identity, only Chen Luo and Peter in the crowd know it. So in order not to cause other people to panic, they are not planning to reveal Bumblebee's true identity for the time being. Now, everyone knows that we can only rely on ourselves on this road, so everyone cheers up. We still have a long way to go to find a suitable camping spot. As for our next destination, I went in and checked it out in advance. If everything goes well, we can arrive in about an hour. If there is no problem, then we will set off. Behind them, Peter and his group looked at each other, looking at the path in front of them, their eyes a little eager to try, and they all nodded, obviously impatient. Seeing their reactions, Chen Luo smiled, and without saying anything else, turned around and took the lead in walking towards the path ahead. When the others saw this, they didn't dare to neglect and quickly followed. Walking on this mountain path because there are trees above the head, it does not seem how hot the weather is. The mottled sunlight shines on people, and combined with the gentle breeze blowing around, it gives people a touch of warmth. In addition, everyone had already taken mosquito repellent and protective measures in advance, so they didn't have to worry about mosquito bites. They turned their eyes around and looked at the pleasant scenery around them, and they seemed to be quite excited along the way. But this is only the beginning. In any case, they're still on the way to climb the mountain. Coupled with the heavy objects in their hands, their physical strength has been even more exhausted. They have been walking for less than half an hour. Except for Chen Luo, most of the others' physical strength has been exhausted. Their bodies are covered with sweat, and they are panting. Their steps have become much heavier, and they are struggling to move forward. Behind Chen Luo, when he saw Gwen's current appearance, Peter's heart moved. Chen Luo's teachings suddenly appeared in his mind. He felt as blessed as his soul. He stepped forward and picked up the bamboo basket in Gwen's hand, and gently touched her. Nodded. Without the burden of heavy objects on her hands, Gwen felt her body lightened, and her eyes, when looking at Peter, became a little softer, with a bright smile on her face. Seeing Gwen's reaction, Peter suddenly became energetic. Somehow, a new strength suddenly appeared in his body, and his steps became brisk again. For point 2, even if the burden on his hands doubled, he seemed not to be affected at all. Looking at the two Peters walking side by side in front of them, Wanda's eyes flashed behind her, and she subconsciously looked at the figure at the front of the crowd. Her eyes became determined again. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and tried to follow. At the front of the crowd, Chen Luo's movements froze, and a trace of complexity flashed in his eyes. Without saying anything, she thought. The next moment, at the bottom of the bamboo basket Wanda was holding, an imperceptible purple-red energy appeared out of thin air, instantly surrounding the bamboo basket. Immediately afterwards, Wanda suddenly felt that the increasingly heavy bamboo basket in her hands suddenly became lighter, as if it had lost its weight in an instant. Subconsciously, she lowered her head and looked at the bamboo basket in her hand. After a moment, she seemed to have thought of something. Her eyes curved in a long arc, and a bright smile suddenly appeared on her face. Chapter 496, Part 1. Finally, as the last half hour passed, under the leadership of Chen Luo, the group finally successfully arrived at their destination. Here we are. After nearly an hour of rushing, Chen Luo and his party finally arrived at their destination. Arriving at the top of this hill, under Chen Luo's previous clearing, in the center of the top of the hill, within a radius of 20 meters, all the originally lush trees were cut down to leave an open space specifically for people's needs. The originally moist soil around it was also burned by the flames and became extremely dry, which effectively prevented the bites of ants and insects that may appear underground. In addition, the trees surrounding the open space added a bit more to the place. A different kind of scenery. Wow! When she reached the top of the mountain and looked at the scene in front of her, Gwen's eyes lit up and she couldn't help but exclaimed, "It's so beautiful here!" Lush trees surround the open space in front of you. Because the area of the top of the mountain is not very large, it only takes less than a minute for the surrounding trees to successfully pass through and reach the outskirts of the forest. Standing on the top of the mountain and looking down, you can see the surroundings. The view is as far as the eye can see. Surrounded by mountains and forests, a clear stream flows at the foot of the mountain. Birds fly over the sky from time to time and disappear into the forest. It looks particularly harmonious. Gwen and Wanda showed great interest in such an environment. They came to the outskirts of the forest with great interest, looked at the scenery at their feet, and kept exclaiming. Then they couldn't wait to take out the prepared items. With a good camera, I started shooting with great interest. In the open space behind the two of them, Chen Luo also began their tasks. Okay, now it's time for us to take action. Chen Luo clapped his hands, waved his hand, pointed to the tent on the side, and said seriously, "We will live here for the next few days, so our first task is to set up the tent first. Everyone should know this, right?" The three Peters looked at each other and nodded in unison, their faces full of confidence. Needless to say, Peter Harry often participated in outdoor summer camps like this when he was a child, so he was no stranger to tent setting. As for Pietro, although he has never been exposed to this, in any case, he and Wanda relied on their abilities to come to this strange country from Sokovia. Their survival skills are even better than those of Peter and the other two. Although he didn't have much experience in setting up tents, he believed that as long as he was given a little time, he would be able to get started quickly. Looking at the three young people with confident faces, Chen Luo nodded with satisfaction and said naturally, "Then it's decided. Let's have a game next. Competition?" The three of them cheered up and looked at Chen Luo with burning eyes. "That's right," Chen Luo said with a smile. "Tent building competition. There are exactly 3 tents here. Each of you is responsible for one. Whoever can complete it in the shortest time will win. The rule is very simple, and the three of them immediately understood it. Chun, since this is a competition, there should be rewards, right? Harry moved his hands and looked at Chen Luo expectantly. Definitely. Chen Luo was not surprised. He pointed at his feet, and the smile on his face became more and more mysterious. Of course there will be rewards, and the content of this reward is guaranteed to satisfy you. 1. You see the mountain below us now, right? Whoever of you can win this competition, I can promise you an idea to transform this mountain. Whether you want to drill a hole into the mountain or install an elevator on the mountain, I can help you achieve it. Are you satisfied with this reward? Quiet. After Chen Luo finished speaking, the three of them became silent for an instant and looked at each other with surprise written on their faces. They never thought that what Chen Luo finally gave was such a reward. It has to be said that this kind of reward is completely different from what they thought just now. Compared with the reward they thought before, the reward given by Chen Luo is undoubtedly more exclusive and attractive. Thinking that if they can win the final victory, the hill under their feet can be transformed into what they imagine through their thoughts. Thinking of such a scene, the eyes of the three people gradually lit up. Under the temptation of this reward, the competitiveness of the three Peters was immediately aroused. They looked at each other, fighting spirit rising in their eyes, and their hearts filled with motivation. That's right. At this time, Pietro suddenly thought of something, looked at Chen Luo, blinked, and asked doubtfully, "Is it really okay for Chen to do this? Can this mountain be transformed at will? Couldn't someone come? Prevent?" Chen Luo shook his head and smiled. "You can rest assured, there will be no such problem at all. I forgot to tell you that the mountain under our feet has been bought by me." Huh? Pietro's eyes suddenly widened and he stammered, "I actually bought a mountain, definitely." Harry on the side nodded without surprise, looked at him with a sure look on his face, shrugged and said, "In this country, there is nothing that money cannot achieve." As for Chen Luo being able to do this, through Peter's unintentional disclosure, Harry also learned Chen Luo's true identity. After learning that Chen Luo was actually a billionaire as famous as Stark, he was able to buy Chen Luo. He was not surprised that a mountain was operating like this. So, do you have any questions? After coming back to their senses and understanding the authenticity of Chen Luo's words, the three of them shook their heads and geared up, obviously unable to hold back. Seeing the reactions of the three people, Chen Luo nodded with satisfaction, then came to the open space on one side, took out the recliner he brought with him, spread it out, lay down on it with a comfortable look, waved his hands, and said, "Since you are all ready, let's start now." As soon as the words fell, the next moment, the three of them rushed out together, took a tent respectively, scattered them everywhere, and started to set up the work quickly. It was at this time that due to the gap in experience, the progress of the three people suddenly became distinct, and the gap was visible to the naked eye. Fortunately, both Peter and Harry had summer camp experience. Although it was a long time ago, they relied on their memories to quickly get started and started practical operations. But Pietro's side was a different story. Chapter 497, Part 1. Looking at the tent supports scattered on the ground under his feet, Pietro stood there blankly, not knowing how to start for a moment. It's not like he didn't try it just now, but without exception, they all ended in failure. After just getting the tent, he was confident that as long as he was given some time, it would be no problem for him to set up a tent. But after being hit by reality, Pietro's face was no longer as relaxed as before, his brows were furrowed, and he was in a dilemma. Do you really need to read the instructions and try it? As soon as this thought emerged from his mind, he quickly threw it behind him. It stands to reason that this method is definitely the safest choice. With the instruction manual as a reference, even if the speed is a little slower, the tent can be set up in an instant. However, what he lacks most now is time. Looking behind him from the corner of his eye, when he saw the progress of Peter and the others, Pietro's face darkened slightly, and a sense of urgency emerged in his heart. Now Peter and Harry are at the same progress. All the tent supports have been set up. The only remaining steps are to cover the tent and finally secure the tent. At the speed of the two of them, it will take less than half an hour at most. Finish. Therefore, if he wants to surpass the progress of the two, unless he can successfully build it in just half an hour, he has little hope of winning this competition. Decisively giving up the idea of reading the manual, Pietro rolled his eyes and came quietly behind Peter, stretching his neck to watch the other person's movements, wanting to reference Peter's methods to help him complete the construction. But soon, his attempt was discovered by Peter. His movements stagnated, and he looked at Harry beside him. Without saying anything, he silently sped up the movements in his hands. After discovering that the two of them started to speed up, Pietro became even more anxious. He immediately turned around and returned to his pile of scattered tents and began to operate in a hurry. However, he had only observed it for less than a minute. It was undoubtedly a fantasy to rely on this to restore Peter and the others' operations. But at this time, he was asked to go back and continue studying, and there was not enough time. According to the current progress, I'm afraid that when he just finished learning, Peter and the others had already successfully built it. Thinking of the reward that Chen Luo had promised before, Pietro's heart was filled with unwillingness. His eyes narrowed, and he immediately took out the instruction manual to read it. He followed the instructions in the instruction manual and started to try to build it. Peter and the others on the other side also saw Pietro's actions. When they saw that Pietro's side had not even set up the scaffolding, they both felt relieved and looked at each other with fighting spirit rising in their eyes. There is no doubt that at the moment Pietro is no longer in their minds, so the final winner of this competition will also be decided between the two. After understanding this, the fighting spirit in the two people's hearts is even stronger. It was an unprecedented excitement, and there seemed to be a faint flash of fire in the air. Without saying a word, after looking at each other, the two of them turned around in unison. Supported by the strong motivation in their hearts, their movements became a little faster. In their hands, two wide hats the tent gradually took shape and was perfected at a speed visible to the naked eye. But for the competition between the two Peters, Pietro seemed not to notice at this moment, completely abandoning the influence of the outside world and devoting himself to his work with 10 heart and 10 chapters. His eyes quickly glanced at the instruction manual in his hand. Pietro felt faint sweat on his forehead. He kept moving his hands and started to act according to the instructions in the instruction manual. In his wholehearted state, it seemed as if a force within Pietro's body gradually began to awaken, causing his body to begin to undergo changes. But this change in him is completely undetectable in his current state. But for Chen Luo, he has always seen the changes in Pietro. Well, this is interesting. Narrowing his eyes, looking at Pietro's busy figure in front of him, Chen Luo seemed to feel something. The corner of his mouth raised a slight arc, and he thought to himself. Under Chen Luo's gaze, Pietro's body began to tremble slightly, and the frequency of his movements gradually accelerated, as if it was at double speed. In his hands, the brackets that were originally scattered on the ground began to be spliced together quickly. Finally, when the finished product appeared, it looks exactly like the tent stands that Peter and the others put together. But this is just the beginning. After splicing the brackets together, Pietro suddenly stood up and started the next step of the work at a frequency several times that of Peter and the two of them. Under his unusual speed, Pietro's figure suddenly became blurry in the air at this moment, making it difficult to see the movements of the opponent's hands. As the ability in his body gradually awakens, although it is still unable to reach the speed of sound, Pietro's speed has now widened the gap with ordinary people. It is precisely because of his too fast movement that his body is the air even dragged out some afterimages which caused the current blur effect. With this speed, Pietro's progress quickly caught up and reached the same level as Peter. Then Pietro kept moving, surpassing the progress of the two of them in the blink of an eye, and the materials originally scattered on the ground were all formed under his rapid assembly. Time passed by, and just as Peter and the two were still immersed in the work at hand, the next moment, Pietro's voice suddenly sounded. I finished, The two of them were startled, and both stopped what they were doing, turned their heads blankly, and looked towards the sound. However, when they saw the completed tent behind Pietro, their eyes widened in disbelief. How can this be? Harry exclaimed, ignoring the work at hand, and quickly stepped forward, spinning around the tent that Pietro had built. However, no matter how much he observed, after a while, Harry still couldn't find any problem. Some of the unbelievers entered the tent, and after trying it out for a while, Harry was surprised to find that the tent was extremely strong, with no flaws at all. There is no doubt that this tent is definitely qualified. Although they understood this, when they thought of Pietro's rookie-level performance before, they couldn't believe that in such a short period of time, the other party was able to successfully master the method of setting up a tent, and it took a long time. Shorter than them. Thinking that when the other party started to build, they had already completed half of the work, But even under such circumstances, they were surpassed by the other party. Such speed was as if they were inhuman. Pietro, how did you do that? Faced with Harry's puzzled eyes, Pietro, who had recovered from his previous state, scratched his head in confusion, apparently without a clue in his heart. Seeing Pietro's reaction, Chen Luo's eyes flashed, and he sighed. It seems like it's still not completely awakened. Chapter 498, Part 1. Chen Luo saw Pietro's actions just now. There is no doubt that the speed Pietro showed at that time was indeed much higher than ordinary people. But compared with the quicksilver in his memory, there was obviously still a huge amount of gap. And looking at Pietro's current state, he is obviously a little confused about what just happened. Such a performance is not what a mutant who has awakened his own ability should look like. So in Chen Luo's opinion, Pietro's performance just now, it does not mean that he has completely awakened his ability. To be precise, perhaps using half-step awakening is more appropriate. Just like just now, it is possible for Pietro to activate his ability unconsciously when he is in an emergency, but there is obviously still a gap in wanting him to release his ability while he is awake. But this also means that Pietro is only one step away from truly awakening. Maybe another accident will stimulate him a little, and his ability will be able to completely awaken, or it may take a longer period of time. No one can say this. Not allowed. But no matter what, with Pietro's ability unexpectedly awakening in this game, the two 747 Peters who originally had the upper hand were directly surpassed by him. They could only look at Pietro with envy, but at the same time, they couldn't help it. Some are curious, wanting to know how the other party wants to transform the hill below them. Well, Pietro, do you have any ideas? Harry asked impatiently. If you haven't thought about it yet, how about using my idea? Huh. Pietro raised his eyebrows and looked at him curiously. Harry, do you have any ideas? Definitely. Harry puffed up his chest and looked at the two friends next to him with a proud look on his face. My idea is very simple. You should have experienced the journey we took up the mountain just now. Although I admit that the environment on the road is good, but it's also quite time-consuming. So I suggest that we install an elevator directly outside and use this elevator to connect the foot of the mountain to the top of the mountain. This way we won't have to climb the mountain so hard when we come here in the future. What do you think of my idea? Isn't it a good idea? Upon hearing Harry's proposal, Peter and Peter looked at each other, with a hint of emotion on their faces. I have to say that his proposal is indeed very tempting. Install an elevator on the mountain? They have never seen such an operation before. Think about it. If this idea is really realized, such a scene will make the two people can't help but yearn for it. Sounds good. Pietro nodded, but still said with some hesitation. But I think my idea can also be tried. You think, wouldn't it be fun if we built a slide on the mountain and connected it to the foot of the mountain so we could go down the mountain? This idea should be fun. Harry agreed at first, but then changed the subject. But it's still a bit short compared to the elevator. After all, the elevator is very convenient for going up and down the mountain. The slide is convenient for going down the mountain, but what about going up the mountain? Hearing this, Pietro suddenly became silent. Apparently, he also understood that the slide did have this drawback. Although it was a level higher than the elevator in terms of fun, it was still not as practical as the elevator in terms of convenience. After thinking about it carefully, he finally had to admit that Harry's idea was indeed better than his. Silently putting his thoughts aside, Pietro was about to make up his mind, but then he seemed to think of something. He turned his eyes and looked at Peter. By the way, Peter, if you have any ideas, let him tell you. Facing their gazes, Peter scratched his head and said with some hesitation, My ideas may not be as interesting as yours. I just wonder if we can build a house directly here. Then we will have a place to live here in the future. The two looked at each other, were silent for a moment, and nodded silently. Sia, this is a good idea. Indeed, if you have a house to live in, it would be much better than living in a tent. Although adding an elevator sounds interesting, compared with a comfortable residence, the two people had no hesitation at all, so they made a decisive choice. At this moment, Chen Luo, who had been watching the whole process, finally spoke. You all have great ideas. I think it's better than this. Peter, Harry, I will assign 2 more tasks to you next. If you can complete them, then I can help you realize your ideas. What do you think of this proposal? As soon as these words came out, the 3 people's eyes suddenly lit up. They thought that if the next 2 tasks were completed, their ideas could become reality. For a moment, Peter and the 2 of them were full of motivation. No problem. As expected, the 2 agreed immediately, and then looked at Chen Luo eagerly, waiting for the task Chen Luo said. Seeing the 2 people looking impatient, Chen Luo pointed behind them angrily. Before doing the next task, you should set up the tent first. Is it possible that you plan to spend the night outside tonight? The 2 of them woke up from a dream, turned to look behind them at the half-completed tent, smiled sheepishly, and then immediately started to take action. More than 10 minutes later, as the tent in the hands of the 2 men was finally set up, Chen Luo slowly got up from the lounge chair, came to the tent of 3 people, looked around, then nodded with satisfaction, and pointed to Pietro on the far right to set up the tent. The tent in front of him opened his mouth and said, "Well done, everyone. Let's start the distribution now." There are a total of 6 people in the group, 3 tents, 2 people in groups. Needless to say, Gwen and Wanda, followed by Peter, Harry, Chen Luo, and Pietro lived together respectively. For Chen Luo's arrangement, Pietro and the others naturally no comments either. After the tents were divided, Wanda and the others, who had been wandering outside for a long time, also returned one after another. It was now noon. After exercising for a long time, Peter and the others obviously had no idea of cooking anymore and took out the food they had prepared. After eating the food hastily, they could no longer suppress their sleepiness, so they each returned to their tents and began to rest. Another 2 hours passed. After the others had rested, Chen Luo came to Peter's tent, dragged the 2 people who were still a little sleepy out of the tent, and began to plan the next tasks for them. After hearing this, the 2 finally cheered up and listened to Chen Luo's next story with serious expressions. The task given by Chen Luo to them was very simple. One person was responsible for fetching water from the mountain, and the other was responsible for collecting firewood from around. As for Chen Luo himself, he planned to go down the mountain to see if he could find some prey, and then use it as their food for the day. Dinner. As soon as they heard that Chen Luo planned to cook by himself, their eyes lit up and they instantly became full of motivation. They picked up the tools they carried and planned to set off immediately. Chapter 499, Part 1. Just when the 3 of them were about to take action, the other 3 people in the other 2 tents were also awakened by their movements and walked out of them one after another. When they saw the equipment in the hands of Chen Luo and the others, after some questioning, Wanda and the others' eyes also lit up. "Great! I have heard from Peter and the others that the food you cook, Uncle Chen Luo, is delicious. It seems that today's dinner will be very sumptuous," Gwen said with some anticipation. Next to Gwen, it was the first time for Wanda to hear that Chen Luo could cook. Seeing the expectant looks on Peter's and the others' faces, Wanda's impression of Chen Luo became even more profound. She looked at Chen Luo's eyes also became softer. "Then let's help too," Wanda said softly. "Gwen and I also saw a lot of mushrooms on the way. We can go pick some mushrooms and bring them back." Hearing this, Chen Luo's face moved slightly and he said, "Mushrooms? That's not bad. But Wanda, there are many poisonous mushrooms on a mountain. Can you tell them apart?" Wanda nodded, indicating that there was no problem. During the time when he and Pietro were wandering, they had not lived in the wild environment, so they also had their own way of identifying food such as wild mushrooms, and they were naturally able to distinguish those that were edible. Seeing Wanda's actions, Chen Luo smiled and nodded. Without any doubt, he agreed directly. "In that case, I'll leave this matter to you." "And me." Seeing that Wanda and the others had something to do, Pietro couldn't help himself and spoke proactively. "I remember there is a stream at the foot of the mountain, right? Then I'll go catch fish. I'll take care of this too." Chen Luo definitely didn't have any objections to this. Since Pietro took the initiative to ask for help, it would reduce his workload, so he naturally agreed to his request. After assigning the tasks, the 6 people immediately started taking action without any hesitation. Harry had to fetch water, so he and Pietro walked together. Except for Wanda and Gwen, the rest moved separately. After saying goodbye to the others, Chen Luo had no idea of wasting any more time. With a thought in his mind, he disappeared instantly. In less than a minute, when he reappeared, his hands were already full of prey. 3 hares were all found in this hill, and there was also a goat, which he bought directly from a livestock farm far away. The reason for doing this it is also because the types of prey that can be used as food in this hill are very rare. It can be said that except for hares, which are highly capable of reproducing, other dangerous creatures such as wild boars and brown bears had already been cleaned up by Chen Luo when they planned to camp here. If not for this, Chen Luo would not be so relieved to let others act separately. After realizing that others would not be in any danger, Chen Luo stopped caring. He looked at the prey in his hands and began to handle it without saying a word. While Chen Luo was handling the ingredients, Wanda and Gwen were on the other side. After searching all the way, Gwen finally seemed to have discovered something. Her eyes lit up, and she quickly ran over and squatted under a big tree, looking at the brightly colored flower growing on the ground. It looked very attractive. "Mushroom. Wanda, I found it." Pointing to the mushroom under her, Gwen said with great interest. "Look at this. This mushroom is so beautiful. It must be delicious." Hearing this, Wanda was stunned for a moment and smiled helplessly. "Gwen, this mushroom is not edible. It is poisonous." "Ah, how is that possible? This mushroom is obviously very beautiful." Hearing Wanda's judgment, Gwen blinked subconsciously and wondered. In the wild, the more colorful mushrooms are, the more dangerous they are. The toxins they contain are not something ordinary people can resist, Wanda explained with a serious face. "I have seen someone accidentally eat a mushroom like the one you saw, and within 10 minutes, The person was not breathing. If we take this kind of mushroom back, it's unclear whether we can spend tonight safely. Hearing this, Gwen subconsciously opened her eyes wide and looked at the brightly colored mushroom under her body. A trace of fear suddenly flashed in her eyes, and she nodded quickly. Wanda, I listened to you. Then we'd better go look elsewhere. Bar. With that said, Gwen quickly stood up, pulled Wanda, and left the area. Then the two of them started searching together. Soon, when they were halfway up the mountain, Wanda suddenly seemed to have discovered something, and her eyes lit up. Found it! When she came to a tree trunk that had collapsed on the roadside and was even hollowed out inside, Wanda looked inside the trunk through the gap. A hint of surprise flashed in her eyes. This is it! #hashtag. Inside the tree trunk, a layer of green moss was spread throughout, and growing together with the moss, there were mushrooms that were dark brown and looked close to earth color. There were probably dozens of these mushrooms. They are about 100 centimeters tall and are very big. If they were picked all of them, it would be enough for their dinner today. Gwen, who was behind her, trotted over quickly, stuck her head out to look at the mushrooms here, and asked with some expectancy, Wanda, can all these mushrooms be eaten? Definitely. Wanda nodded affirmatively with a smile on her face. And these mushrooms are enough for us to consume today. After receiving Wanda's confirmation, Gwen suddenly became excited and quickly handed over the bamboo basket in her hand. Then what are we waiting for? Let's start quickly. After we finished picking these mushrooms, we can go back. They just went ahead and started picking after successfully finding the target. However, while they were picking on the tree trunk behind them, a venomous snake with a body of green, slender, and constantly spitting out snake messages, about 1 meter long, snaked down to the ground, twisting and turning. He moved his body and quickly approached the direction of the two people. But in less than 10 seconds, the venomous snake had already arrived behind Wanda and the two of them. The body slowly stood upright. A pair of ruby-like eyes looked straight in Gwen's direction. The mouth slowly opened. 2 fangs were exposed in the air, and they moved forward bit by bit. At this moment, Wanda straightened up slightly and inadvertently looked behind Gwen with her peripheral vision. When she saw the slowly approaching figure behind Gwen, suddenly, Wanda's pupils shrank and her heart skipped a beat. Tyke! Wanda, what's wrong with you? Seeing Wanda's abnormality, Gwen asked with some confusion. The next moment, just as her voice fell, behind her, the poisonous snake's movements suddenly accelerated, like a sharp arrow ready to go, quickly cutting through the air in front, opening its big mouth, and fiercely moving toward the grid. One bit the leg. Don't want. Seeing this scene, Wanda was stunned and almost subconsciously stretched her hand behind Gwen, trying to stop what was about to happen next. Just under her strong will to protect Gwen from harm, the power originally hidden in her body finally reacted. Her body shook suddenly, and then a deep red color quietly appeared in the depths of Wanda's pupils. Chapter 500, Part 1. Just when the venomous snake was about to bite its target, the next moment, a crimson mist appeared out of thin air, instantly wrapping around its body and firmly controlling its movements. What's wrong? Gwen was startled and subconsciously turned her head. When she saw clearly the poisonous snake behind her that was very close to her, Gwen's expression suddenly changed. She subconsciously took a few steps back and fell to the ground. However, when she came back to her senses, she finally discovered something unusual. She saw that the poisonous snake that was about to touch her was now wrapped in a red mist, and its body was stagnant in midair, motionless, and was firmly bound in place. Seeing such an abnormal situation, Gwen almost subconsciously looked in the direction of the source of the spread of garden energy. Wanda. Beside her, Wanda's appearance has changed at this moment. A scarlet light appeared in 157 size. Her long brown hair was windless. Her hands were wrapped in red mist, and an inexplicable aura emerged from her body, just like a witch releasing magic. It looked like it adds a bit of charm to it. Hearing Gwen's exclamation, Wanda's body trembled, and she suddenly came back to reality. She looked at the red mist in her hand and felt the power surging outward from her body. She seemed to understand something, and a hint of surprise flashed in her eyes. You must know that since returning from the Garden of Eden a month ago, he and Pietro have been waiting for the awakening of their own abilities. However, after a month, apart from the skin getting better and better, there were no other changes. Until today, when Wanda saw Gwen in a critical moment, Wanda was so nervous that the power originally hidden in his body finally awakened in one fell swoop, restraining the poisonous snake in place, thus successfully saving Gwen. Feeling the power in her body, Wanda thought in her mind and flicked her hands. The next moment, the poisonous snake was flung away by her into the distance and disappeared from the sight of the two of them. As the red mist gradually dissipated, Wang Yin finally returned to normal. Turning to look at Gwen, Wanda quickly stepped forward and asked with concern, Gwen, are you okay? After staring blankly at the other party for a long time, Gwen finally came back to her senses, seemed to understand something, and said in a complicated voice, Wanda, are you mutant? Hearing this, Wanda was silent for a moment, then nodded slightly. For a moment, the atmosphere suddenly fell into silence. Finally, Gwen spoke again. Wanda, thank you for saving me just now. Wanda raised her head and said with some surprise. Gwen, don't you mind that I am immune? Gwen smiled and shook her head. Don't get me wrong, Wanda, I don't have any other opinions about mutant. And if it hadn't been for Wanda just now, I probably wouldn't have been able to continue participating in this camping trip. That's it. After hearing Gwen's answer, Wanda breathed a sigh of relief, and her face turned into a smile again. That's right. Gwen suddenly seemed to have thought of something, and said seriously, Peter and the others, I will help you hide it. Wanda, don't worry. Wanda. Seeing Wanda's expression, Gwen blinked. Suddenly, her eyes gradually widened, and Byron said, could it be that Peter and the others also? Seeing that Gwen seemed to understand something, Wanda smiled awkwardly, and the meaning was self-evident. The other side. At the moment when Wanda and two people were communicating, at the foot of the mountain, Pietro and two people also arrived at their destination at the same time. Holding the axe in hand, Harry looked hard at the branches beside him. While watching Pietro walking towards the creek ahead with fishing gear in his hand, he said with some worry, Pietro, can you do it over there? Do you want some help? No. Pietro waved his hand without looking back, his face full of confidence. Just wait and see. With my skills, we will be able to set off back soon. Seeing this, Harry shrugged, said no more, and continued to work. It had to be said that because of Chen Luo's previous promise, Harry was also very motivated for the activity of chopping firewood. He forgot about his fatigue for a moment and walked quickly, wandering around collecting wooden seats scattered on the ground. By the stream, Pietro found a boulder and sat on it, hung the bait on the hook, then swung the fishing rod, watched the fishing line submerge into the water, and waited with confidence. However, as time passed by, an hour later, the confidence on Pietro's face gradually disappeared. His eyes widened, staring at the water, and his expression gradually became irritable. Bite quickly. Why don't you stupid fish take the bait? Following his gaze, he could see the float on the water, with water splashing everywhere. Through the clear water, he could faintly see several fish swimming nearby. However, these swimming fish were so close to the hook and had no intention of biting the hook. They seemed to be teasing him. The corners of Pietro's eyes kept twitching as he watched, and he gradually became anxious. Finally, a few more minutes passed. Finally, Pietro couldn't hold it in any longer. He threw the fishing rod aside, took off his shirt, and jumped directly into the water. Plop! Pietro's figure swam quickly underwater, like a real swimming fish, quickly approaching the direction of the beauties ahead. In just a few seconds, before all the swimming fish could escape, Pietro, who had quick eyes and quick hands, reached out in an instant and grabbed the largest one tightly in his hand. He suddenly stuck his head out and grabbed the raindrop in his hand. Pietro's mouth gradually widened, and his smile gradually became ferocious. Bang, bang, bang. Without any hesitation, he gave the fish in his hand a few big bucks. Looking at the rain in his hand, his eyes gradually turned white, and a ferocious laughter sounded from the water. Run. Can you try running for me again? Alarmed by the movement on Pietro's side, Harry came to his senses instantly and followed the source of the sound to see a doctor. When he saw the scene over there clearly, Harry's mouth gradually opened wide, and his head was filled with question marks. Pietro, what happened to your 0.6 side? It's okay. Pietro quickly swam to the shore, holding up the big fish in his hand, his face full of excitement. Harry, look, I caught a fish. Harry, are you sure you were fishing? Don't worry about those details. Pietro threw the fish in his hand into the water tank. He turned around and looked at the water. While moving his body, he said without looking back, as long as you can catch the fish, that's enough. After saying that, Pietro looked towards the water, his expression gradually becoming ferocious. You stupid fish, since you won't take the bait, then I will catch you with my own hands. I'm sure to eat today's grilled fish. As soon as he finished speaking, Pietro jumped down and disappeared instantly with a huge amount of water splash.
Thanks for watching. You can find the next videos in the playlist linked in the info card or directly on my channel. If you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. Feel free to drop a comment.